Chapter 360. 6 days later, in front of the flying crane pavilion of the Guardian Palace, the 12 disciples gathered together and laughed happily. These people were all disciples of the Master and Disciple, and they were all at the 3rd level of the Chi-Bright realm. This time, they were going to the Little Devil Cave to cultivate because they wanted to use the abundant spirit Chi to condense a Xian seed and enter the mystic light realm. Nowadays, the Shoming Palace was no longer as secluded as before. Immortal Peng was clearly on the side of the Master and his disciples. Therefore, many junior disciples of the Master and his disciples came to the Devil's Cave to practice in seclusion, and at the same time to hone their minds. A disciple suddenly sighed and said worriedly, "I heard that the inner demon is good at playing tricks on people. It's invisible and hard to guard against. I wonder if I can resist it?" Immediately, a tall and elegant disciple dressed in a blue robe laughed and said in a joking tone, "Actually, it's just a demon. What's there to be afraid of, fellow disciples? We have the advantage in numbers, so why should we be afraid of the demon coming over? If any senior brother is bewitched by the demon, I can slap him and wake him up." His words caused a roar of laughter. A girl in pink glanced at him and said while covering her mouth, "All right, if senior brother Yu is bewitched by the demon, I won't be lenient. I guarantee that the slap will be loud and clear." Senior brother Yu laughed and said, "If junior sister Bao doesn't hit me until my face is swollen, then it means that you care about me." These disciples were all from the same master and some of them had known each other since they were young. Thus, they didn't hold back when talking to each other. As soon as he said this, a disciple came up and bumped senior brother Yu with his shoulder. He winked and said, "I'm afraid that senior brother Yu will be reluctant to wake up if he sees the demon that looks like junior sister Bao." Junior sister Bao blushed and spat. "Shameless." All the disciples burst into laughter. Mo Ying looked at her fellow disciples and her lips curled into a smile. She said, "Actually, we're just lucky to be able to enter the Devil's Cave and receive the protection of a senior with a profound cultivation. We really should rejoice." All the disciples agreed. The Demon Cave was not a place to roam. Those who had entered before were very few. There were very few who were able to escape unscathed. However, it just so happened that they had come at a good time, so they were able to take advantage of the situation. This could be considered their lucky chance. At this time, a delicate young girl said, "I wonder which senior the sect will send to protect us? I wonder how he compares to our masters?" Mo Ying thought about it and said with some uncertainty, "Perhaps it's under the command of an elder. Junior sister Rui, you don't have to worry. I think that senior's cultivation is definitely not weak." The 12 of them waited for almost 2 hours. The sky rumbled, and a cloud of smoke descended from the clouds. Not long after, the clouds retracted, revealing a handsome young Taoist. As soon as she saw him, the disciples could only feel that his eyes were deep and unfathomable. There was an indescribable pressure coming from him. Their hearts couldn't help but shiver and their breathing quickened. Mo Ying immediately recognized this Taoist. She opened her mouth and cried out in surprise, "Martial Uncle Zhang." During the sect competition 8 years ago, a few of these disciples had seen Zhang Yan before. They all cried out in surprise. Some disciples who didn't know his identity asked about it. Just now that they knew his identity, they couldn't help but be shocked. They didn't expect that. The sect would actually send one of the top 10 disciples, Zhang Yan, to protect them. For a moment, they all stared with their eyes wide open, not even daring to breathe loudly. Zhang Yan had a gentle smile on his face. He looked at the faces of the 12 people and said, "Are you all ready? Once the time is up, I will bring you down to the Demon Cave." After all, his status was high. Although his tone was calm and polite, these Ming Chi disciples were intimidated by his status and aura. For a moment, no one dared to answer. Mo Ying hesitated for a moment. Just as she was about to speak, junior sister Rui said timidly, "Martial Uncle Zhang, we have prepared the elixirs and artifacts." Zhang Yan nodded slowly. Without a word, he flicked his sleeves and led the way into the flying crane tower. These disciples were still standing there in a daze, until they heard a deep shout from inside, "What are you all standing there for? Come in quickly." Only then did they come back to their senses and hurriedly entered the tower. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that the eye of the sea was already bubbling, as if it was boiling. He knew that the time was up. He said in a deep voice, "Listen up. Later, I will use my mana and bring you all into the demon cave. When you are in the cave, if you see anything strange, don't panic and don't attack recklessly. Do you all understand?" These disciples didn't dare to disobey. They all nodded and said yes. Zhang Yan didn't say anything more. He rolled up his sleeves and said, "Rise." In an instant, a cloud of smoke was released and brought these disciples up. They only felt their bodies lighten, as if they were lifted up by a buoyant force. Their bodies were involuntarily thrown into the eye of the sea. After a moment of daze, when they looked carefully again, they found that they were wrapped in a layer of smoke. This smoke was especially strange. It didn't condense or disperse, and was as thin as a cicada's wing. Not only could they see the fast-flowing seawater around them clearly, but they could also look at each other. After the initial discomfort, they were surprised to find that they could actually talk to each other clearly. Mo Ying was secretly surprised. She was Mo Tianhua's junior and had seen a few core formation cultivators before. It was not that she was inexperienced. This kind of core fiend chi change meant that the person who used it had at least reached the point where it could change according to his heart and was hard and soft. One of the disciples couldn't help but say excitedly, "Before coming here, I didn't think that it would be Martial Uncle Zhang who would protect us." The one who answered was the pink-clothed female cultivator with the surname Bao. She also exclaimed, "Yes, I have long heard of Martial Uncle Zhang's reputation. Looking at him today, although he doesn't put on any airs, I feel a little breathless standing in front of him." All the disciples nodded in agreement. Although there was a hint of a smile in Zhang Yan's words, when he stood there, they felt that he was dignified and resolute. They unconsciously restrained themselves and acted cautiously. Zhang Yan could be considered to be famous among the younger disciples. After all, he was the only true disciple who came from the lower house in 100 years and was not from an aristocratic family. Later, he broke the god-slaying formation. He fought 100 people with one sword, and then obtained the position of the top 10 disciples. Each of these events could be used as a topic of conversation, and even made people excited. Zhang Yan went all the way down, breaking through the waves, his expression relaxed and calm. Back then, he went down the sea and used about half an hour. Just now, he had reached the bottom. But now he was a core transformation level 2 cultivator who had broken out of the shell. He brought more than 10 disciples and did not need so much time. In less than the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, he saw a bright light in front of him. He knew that he had reached the entrance of the sea eye. With a shout, he gathered his pill fiend and rushed into the entrance. The 10 disciples only felt a rumble, and the light in front of them brightened. They were surprised to find that they had arrived at a bright and vast place. In the majestic and strange cave, seawater kept rushing down like a waterfall. However, when it reached the thin mist that wrapped around their bodies, it seemed to hit some kind of barrier and was pushed to the sides. They could not help but exclaim repeatedly. Zhang Yan's eyes were like cold lightning. He looked around and unconsciously raised his eyebrows. The spiritual energy here was denser than in the past. This was not a good thing. But when the devil tribulation came, the heaven and earth changed, and the flow of chi changed. Therefore, this devil cave was also growing stronger and stronger. And because he had come here in the past, this feeling was even more profound and intense. With a thought, he waved his big sleeves and landed on the ground. He first collected the pill fiend. Then he let the disciples out. Looking back, he saw that the 2 of them were already in a daze, as if they were about to fall asleep. He shook his head and suddenly shouted. When the 2 disciples heard this, they immediately quivered and woke up. Zhang Yan glanced at them. He spoke indifferently, "There are many devils here, especially the Yin devils. They are formless and invisible, and they can invade one's heart to do evil. Although I have protected you all here, I can only ensure that you are not harmed by the walking devils and the true devils. If the heart devils cause trouble, I cannot protect you all the time. You can only rely on yourselves. If you cannot overcome this, then you are not fit to be disciples of my Qinsong." When the 12 disciples heard this, their hearts shivered, and they had no choice but to be cautious. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back, looking around. Before he came here, he'd been thinking about whether it was the Blood Soul sect that did it, or if it was a disciple of theirs that did it. On the surface, it seemed the same, but in reality, it was very different. If he rashly went against a sect, he knew that he did not have the ability to do so, but if it was just one or two cultivators of the same realm, he was not afraid at all. According to his deduction, that group of Blood Soul sect disciples in the past should have found this place by accident, and it was not that the Blood Soul sect knew about this place. It was not without reason that he thought so. First, the structure of the demon sect disciples was very loose. It was not like the large profound sects, where all the disciples gathered together, and often the disciples of the same sect did not know each other. As long as they had the same cultivation method, they could be said to be in the same sect. The reason for this was determined by the characteristics of their cultivation method. The devil path was particular about plundering and killing. If there were too many disciples gathered in one place, they would have to plunder each other until one side gained the upper hand and drove their fellow disciples out or killed them. Among the 6 sects of the demon sect, only the 6 strongest forces occupied the 6 great demon caves, and not the entire sect. Zhang Yan thought that if he was the disciple of the Blood Soul sect and found this small demon cave, he would definitely be wild with joy. No matter what, he would definitely not let his fellow sect members know, and he would even do everything possible to prevent this news from spreading. This was also in line with the actions of the demon sect disciples in the past. As for the number and cultivation of the Blood Soul sect disciples, he also had an idea. The Yuanying elder that Qi Yuntian had sent did not find the other entrance. It was probably because there were too few clues, and there was not enough manpower. But it also meant that the other side was far away. If there were not many Blood Soul sect disciples, they could just find the demon near the entrance, and there was no need to go deeper. It must be that there were many Blood Soul sect disciples, and they had swept away the nearby demon sect disciples, and just now they had come here. But if there were too many people, it was easy for the news to leak. Therefore, he boldly deduced that there was a 70% chance that the group of Blood Soul sect cultivators in the past was formed by 1 to 3 core transformation cultivators and their disciples. But after so many years, the situation might have changed, and he could not completely rule out the possibility that there were demon sect cultivators with higher cultivation here, so he had to be careful. Chapter 361. Zhang Yan took out 8 talisman cards from his sleeve and rubbed them with his thumb. There was a rise of smoke, and they turned into 8 white lights that flew away and disappeared into the dark cave. He narrowed his eyes and followed the talisman carefully with his mind. This talisman was a devil-warding talisman. It could disperse devils, but right now he wasn't using it to kill devils. Instead, he was using it to find out which area had too few devils. It was very likely that the disciples of the Blood Soul sect had taken in devils. After the talisman went out for a few miles, he destroyed them one by one, but he did not find anything unusual. He did not find it strange. This place was close to the entrance of the Sea Devil Cave, so it was very likely that the other party would avoid this place. As for whether the other party would give up this place because of the Qinsong school, in his opinion, the possibility was very small. Not to mention the temperament of the disciples of the Devil Path, it was almost impossible for them to resist the temptation of abandoning such a good devil cave. As long as the disciples of the Blood Soul sect were still active here, he would be able to find some clues along the way. However, he also knew that this method was too time-consuming and energy-consuming, and the progress was too slow. Originally, he accepted this task with some confidence in his heart. The reason was that Su Ang had stayed in this devil cave for more than 20 years, so he was very familiar with this place. However, he did not expect that when he came out from Immortal Peng and returned to the mansion to take out Su Ang's separated soul for questioning, he found that it was much weaker and almost on the verge of dissipating. He immediately guessed that it was caused by a battle with an enemy. He called out several times in his heart, but there was no response. He guessed that it was due to a serious injury. Therefore, he could only put this idea aside for the time being. Mo Ying saw that 2 of the 12 people on her side had fallen into the devil cave just now, so it was obvious that the devil was powerful. Just in case, she quickly took out a calming pill from her sachet and swallowed it. In fact, the 2 disciples were not as weak as she thought, and the devil was also not that powerful. It was just because Zhang Yan brought them here this time that they thought they had the protection of a senior, so they had a sense of dependence in their hearts. It was inevitable that she would let her guard down. Thanks to Zhang Yan's reminder. After ordering the Yin demons to retreat, the 2 disciples suddenly felt a little ashamed. They thought about how they had painstakingly cultivated for more than 10 years. This trip to the Devil's Cave was originally a good opportunity, but if their minds were taken away by the heart demon, then no one would be able to save them. Even reincarnation would be an extravagant hope. Fortunately, they were well prepared. Mo Ying called a few disciples over. They set up restriction array flags all around to protect the 12 people. This place was rich in spirit qi. After they settled down, they all tried their best to adjust their breathing, fighting for time to improve their cultivation. Mo Ying stole a glance at Zhang Yan. He stood on a high stone platform, his eyes shining like lightning, as if he was searching for something. She was a sensitive and meticulous woman. She had calmed down after the excitement from before. However, he felt slightly uneasy. This time, the sect had actually sent Zhang Yan, who was ranked 9th among the 10 great disciples, to this place. If it was just to protect their group, then they were overestimating them a bit too much. Even she herself found it hard to believe, so she speculated that this matter was definitely not ordinary. If there was really any danger, this place was filled with people from the same sect, and she didn't want to see anything happen to any of them. After thinking about it carefully, she bit her red lower lip and took the initiative to step forward. She bowed and said, "Greet Uncle Master Zhang and send my regards to Uncle Master on behalf of my uncle." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised and asked, "May I know which senior martial brother your uncle is?" Mo Ying lowered her head. She said softly, "My uncle's surname is Mo Jing, and his name is Tianhua." After she said that, she felt really uneasy. Mo Tianhua and Zhang Yan didn't have much of a relationship, and there were some conflicts between them. However, she was also smart. When the 2 of them had a conflict, Zhang Yan actually didn't lose out. Instead, it was her uncle who was taught a lesson. Even if Zhang Yan ignored her, he wouldn't make things difficult for her, a junior. Instead, she could use this opportunity to talk to him and get some information. Zhang Yan looked at her and smiled. He said meaningfully, "So your senior brother Mo's junior. You do look a bit like him, but he's not as smart as you." Mo Ying met his gaze and suddenly felt guilty, as if she was seen through. She quickly lowered her head. Zhang Yan looked forward again, and his gaze landed on the deep end. He said, "The spiritual qi in this devil's cave is even denser than when I was here last time. I think the devil's cave is even more powerful. However, it will be very beneficial for your cultivation. The deeper you go, the better it will be. I won't hide it from you. There is indeed another important matter that requires us to go deeper into the devil's cave. However, every 100 miles, I will set up a prohibition formation. Among you disciples, if you have the guts, you can come with me." Mo Ying's thoughts were exposed by Zhang Yan's words, and she felt her ears burning. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, "I will rest here for a while. We will depart in an hour. You can decide what to do by then." After saying that, he sat cross-legged on the stone platform, closed his eyes and held his breath. He didn't speak anymore. Mo Ying pondered for a moment. This time, her fellow disciples had gathered a lot of spirit shells and bought a flying boat. 100 miles was not short, but it was not long either. The spiritual qi here was so dense that it made her exclaim. If they went deeper into the devil's cave, they would definitely gain a lot of benefits. It was worth a try. More importantly, if they followed Zhang Yan, they would encounter danger. As a senior in the sect, how could he just sit back and do nothing? Therefore, after she went back, she didn't mention what she was worried about. She only told her fellow disciples about her thoughts. Immediately, many people agreed with her. Although there were a few people who were still hesitant, they couldn't change the minds of the majority and decided to follow along. Mo Ying then returned to Zhang Yan's place. After bowing, she said softly, "Martial uncle, we are willing to go with you." She waited for a while, but seeing that Zhang Yan was still sitting there without saying a word or moving, she bent her knees and lifted the hem of her skirt to leave. She released the flying boat, and everyone sat on it, silently adjusting their breathing as they waited to depart. After an hour, Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and stood up from the stone. He turned into a cloud and flew forward. When Mo Ying and the others saw this, they also hurriedly drove the flying boat to follow. However, Zhang Yan's speed was too fast. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. They anxiously moved forward for 100 miles. When they saw a restriction, they couldn't help but be overjoyed. After discussing for a while, they decided to go deeper. They walked and stopped. Along the way, although they saw a few true devils who had gained intelligence hanging behind the flying boat, they were protected by a formation every 100 miles, so they didn't encounter any danger. After 3 days, they reached the depths of the Devil's Cave and saw Zhang Yan's figure again. Mo Ying exclaimed in surprise, "Martial Uncle Zhang." Zhang Yan nodded when he saw that they had caught up to him. At this moment he also slowed down. Although he didn't gain anything in the past few days, he wasn't anxious. Just as he was about to move again, he felt that the split soul seemed to be trembling slightly. His heart moved, and he took out a piece of beautiful jade. A wisp of Su Yang's soul emerged from the jade. He said in a panic, "Master, a few days ago, I fought with a Devil Dao disciple and was seriously injured. These few days, I have been absorbing souls to recuperate, so I haven't replied. I hope Master can forgive me." Zhang Yan also knew that this matter couldn't be blamed on him. He smiled and said, "Fellow Su, there's no need to mention this matter anymore. Let me ask you, are you familiar with the situation here?" Su Yang was stunned. He looked around and hurriedly said, "Master, isn't this in the Ci Devil's Cave? I have stayed here for more than 20 years. I can't say that I know everything, but I know the general situation." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I think so too. Then, have you met that Blood Soul sect disciple here?" Su Yang shrunk his neck. He carefully replying to Master, "Not only did I see him, I even swallowed the soul of a disciple when he was unprepared." Zhang Yan's eyes lit up, and he asked, "Then do you know where they entered this Devil's Cave?" Su Yang hesitated for a moment and said, "Although I know the general location, I also sense that there are cultivators with high cultivation guarding that place. However, I also sense that there were cultivators with profound cultivation guarding that place. Furthermore, the disciples of the Devil sect are experts in dealing with devils, so I didn't dare to get too close. I can't be sure." However, Zhang Yan became spirited and said, "Fellow Su, I don't need you to lead the way. You just need to tell me the path." Su Yang had nothing to hide, so he hurriedly told him what he knew. Zhang Yan kept nodding as he listened, memorizing everything in his heart. Seeing Su Yang's figure dim, it seemed that his figure dimmed even more after he said that. Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Su, go back and recuperate. If there's anything, I will find you again." Su Yang was grateful and said, "Thank you for your understanding, Master." Zhang Yan put the beautiful jade back into his sleeve. At this moment his eyes flashed. With the right direction to guide him, he didn't need to fumble around. After calculating in his heart, he got up and flew to the flying ship of Mo Ying and the others. He said, "You all can cultivate here, there's no need to go forward. The restriction formation I set up will protect you. If I don't return, you all can return on your own after you've cultivated to perfection." After saying that, he leaped up and turned into a wisp of smoke. Like a thunderclap, he tore through the air and disappeared in a flash. Mo Ying calmed herself down and turned back to say, "Uncle Master Zhang brought us to the depths of this Devil's Cave. It's a rare opportunity, so everyone must cherish it." These days, when the disciples cultivated in this place, they felt that the accumulation of spiritual qi was extremely fast. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they advanced by leaps and bounds. Thus, they all nodded and seized the opportunity to circulate their cultivation techniques, as if they were afraid of missing out on a fated chance. Zhang Yan followed the path Su Yang pointed out and flew to the west. In less than half a day, he arrived in front of a cave. He didn't need to get close and just looked from afar. It didn't take long for him to see some clues. Although there was no formation here, it was obviously carefully arranged by someone. If he looked carefully, he could even see traces of people entering and leaving. Not setting up a formation was precisely for better concealment. He wasn't in a hurry to go in. Instead, he circled around outside, thinking that if he set up a formation here, it wouldn't be so simple. He would definitely set up an artifact in an inconspicuous corner. He didn't hope to injure the enemy, but as long as he was alerted, he could be prepared in advance. After pondering for a while, he smiled faintly and found a hidden boulder outside to sit down. He cast a concealment spell and sat still like a statue. If this was the entrance, then the demon sect disciple would definitely come out from here. He waited patiently, but after waiting for more than 10 days, there was still no movement. His expression didn't change, as if he had only waited for a moment. Another 20 days passed, and there was still nothing. His heart was like a boulder, and he still sat still. On the 36th day, suddenly, a blood-red figure flashed out in front of the cave. Chapter 362. What Zhang Yan saw was a blood soul. Just now, it appeared at the entrance of the cave and turned into a blood-colored shadow that flew far away. This blood soul was a secret technique of the blood soul sect. It was to split off a part of one's soul and use the body of a demon to nourish it. In the end, it would turn into a vicious being that wasn't any weaker than a flying sword. When this thing flew, it was silent. Normal cultivators would only see a flash of blood-colored light. If it hugged a living person, it would be able to devour their flesh and soul and use it for itself. When one cultivated this technique, the blood soul would be similar to the real person and people wouldn't be able to tell if it was real or fake. Moreover, it would be able to gather and scatter at will, and it would have its own power. There were also all sorts of weird changes that outsiders wouldn't know about. When fighting with others, if the opponent wasn't careful, they would fall for it and lose all their essence blood. It was really amazing. When Zhang Yan entered the demonic cave, he had met 2 clear Qi realm disciples of the Blood Soul sect. After the blood soul left their bodies, it could only go dozens of steps away. However, this blood soul flew several miles away, which meant that its cultivation was even higher. However, Zhang Yan could see that its figure was blurry and its face wasn't clear. It hadn't condensed yet, so he guessed that this person was at the mystic light realm. However, since the blood soul was here, its real body wouldn't be far away. Thus, he wasn't in a rush to attack and just watched coldly from the side. The blood soul's eyes gave off a 3-inch-long light as it spun around the cave like a ghost. It would occasionally stop to check what was going on. From the looks of it, it was being overly careful. After half an hour, it had checked its surroundings again. Seeing that there was nothing else, it silently landed on the ground. Another figure flashed at the entrance of the cave, and this time, it was a strange beast with spirited eyes. Its entire body was snow-white, and its fur was soft. It looked like a puppy, but its eyes were bloodshot, and it sniffed as it walked. It seemed like it was trying to identify the scent. Zhang Yan's eyebrows twitched. It was obvious that the other party was still worried about using the blood soul to scout ahead, so he even used a spirit beast to scout ahead. This was extremely cautious. Fortunately, his concealment technique was able to restrain his qi, so he didn't have to worry about being discovered. After the beast circled once, it shook its head and tail, barking twice like a dog. After a while, at the entrance of the cave, a Taoist stuck his head out and walked in. The man looked to be in his 30s. He had a goatee and a shrewd look. His eyes flickered and he wore a pair of sharkskin gloves. He was dressed in a black robe, wrapped in a large cloak, revealing a pair of straw sandals. In the crook of his arm was a foot-long jade plate shaped like a sea nan. He first looked around and called back the blood soul, keeping it by his side. He then took out a golden hoop and put it on the cub's head, keeping it inside. Then he muttered something. He pointed at the jade plate, and the spoon on it spun in a circle before stopping at a certain spot. He chuckled and released a thick blood-colored light, which wrapped around him and flew off into the distance. Since he could see the person, Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony. He smiled coldly and released the water element true light. Huge waves rolled and spread out. the water-colored true light instantly traveled 1,000 feet away. Before the Taoist could react, the light flashed and he was sucked into it, drifting away into the boundless river. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Zhang Yan made a hand sign and shook the true water light, shaking the person to the ground. However, he had already fainted from the turbulent water. In order to prevent any demon sect secret technique from transmitting messages, he took out a few talisman cards and sealed the person's chi orifices. He then carefully checked the things on the person's body and set up a restriction to isolate the inside from the outside. Only then did he wake the person up. As soon as the Taoist woke up, he realized that his chi orifices had been suppressed and he couldn't move at all. He didn't say anything, but his eyes rolled around as if he was trying to guess who had captured him. Zhang Yan raised his hand and pointed. The Taoist was pulled up by an invisible force and leaned against a rock. The Taoist looked up and saw Zhang Yan in a black robe with a faint Tao Qi and a haze surrounding him. He immediately recognized that this was a Tao transformation cultivator, and his heart could not help but skip a beat. Zhang Yan looked at the person calmly and said, "Fellow Taoist, what's your name? Whose sect are you from?" Although his tone was not strict, the Taoist seemed to be intimidated by the invisible aura and felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. It was as if he was facing a ferocious senior expert in the sect at that moment. He suddenly felt his mouth go dry. He had been in the demon sect for a long time and had some foresight. He couldn't see through the other party's depth, but he could feel the indifference and coldness on the other party's body right away. He was not someone who could be deceived. Thus, he took a deep breath and said, "Reporting to this Taoist, I'm Shining, a disciple of the Blood Soul sect. My master's surname is Yu, and he's an elder of the Blood Soul sect." Anyone with a bit of foresight could tell which sect he was from the Blood Soul, so there was no need to hide it. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "So it's fellow Taoist Shen. I don't understand why you're here." Shen Ying had wanted to say some nonsense to get over it, but for some reason, the moment he met Zhang Yan's seemingly deep and bottomless gaze, his heart palpitated. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he decided to speak the truth. This lowly Taoist had heard from a fellow disciple that there is a demonic cave here, which is very beneficial for cultivation. That's why I wanted to capture a few demonic heads and bring them back to refine them. I didn't expect that Taoist would be here. If I have offended you, please forgive me. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Based on this person's words, it seemed like this was his first time here. Furthermore, based on his tone, he didn't seem to know that this place led directly to the Qinsong school's territory. Could it be that this person was not with the Blood Soul sect disciple who had come here earlier? This was interesting. His eyes flickered slightly and he said in a low voice, "How did you know about this place's secret? And how did you get here? Tell me in detail." Since Shen Ying had already told the truth, he wasn't afraid to say a few more words. Moreover, his life and death were in the hands of others. How could he allow himself to play any tricks? He immediately spilled the beans. "A few days ago, my master met with a fellow disciple that he hadn't seen for many years. However, the two of them sparred, and I noticed that not only did my martial uncle's cultivation greatly increase, even his disciples were the same. At that time, I felt that there was something strange about this, and because I'm usually clever, I was specially sent here to investigate." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "From what you've said, you're quite capable. You really managed to find this place." Shen Ying coughed and said, "To tell you the truth, I've hooked up with a female disciple of my martial uncle. After getting familiar with her, she told me about this place. This time, I calculated the time, and while her disciple wasn't here, I wanted to sneak here and take advantage of her." Zhang Yan looked at him and asked, "Since you've come here on my master's orders, why didn't you go back and report earlier?" Shen Ying couldn't help but feel a little awkward and said, "There are still many disciples under my master. If I go back and report, I'll just be rewarded with some spiritual shells, but I don't know when I'll get the big reward. I'll definitely fight with that martial uncle. I've always cherished my life, so I thought that I might as well take advantage of the situation first and delay my master as long as I can. If I really can't hide it any longer, then it's not too late to act then." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "You're quite calculative." Shen Ying smiled apologetically and said, "I've embarrassed myself in front of you." Zhang Yan saw that he answered every question and knew that he was a perceptive person, so he didn't beat around the bush and asked, "What's the cultivation level of your martial uncle? Where does he live? And how many disciples does he have? Do you know?" Shen Ying thought that since this Taoist could guard this place, he would know the whereabouts of his martial uncle's sect sooner or later. "It's not my sect, so why should I hide it for them?" Thinking of this, he said, "My martial uncle is a cultivator in the 3rd tier of the core transformation realm. His cave is in the Cave of Dead Opportunity on Empty Xiaozhe. After leaving this place, head northwest. If you fly fast enough, you'll arrive in about 12 days. My martial uncle has more than 50 disciples, and 2 of them have already stepped into the core transformation realm, and their cultivation levels are also not bad." After listening to this, Zhang Yan thought silently and thought to himself, "My divine contract once said that the only way is to seize the blood and origin spirit of the disciples of the demon path. Just now is the most suitable time, but until now, I haven't met many disciples of the demon path, so I don't know if this is true. If there are only a few core transformation cultivators at Shen Ying's place, I'm not afraid, it's worth a try." After having an idea, he said, "Since you've come here, you must know how to avoid the traps on the cave door, so you'll lead the way to Mti Xiaozhe today. If what you said is true, I'll only destroy your physical body, and I can let your origin spirit go. As for whether you reincarnate or take over a body, it's up to you." When Shen Ying heard this, his body first trembled, then he calmed down. Although this ending was not good for him, it was not too bad. His demon path cultivation method was different from Taoism. Even without a physical body, his origin spirit could still fly around for a period of time. As long as he seized the physical body of a fellow disciple, even if he lost some of his cultivation, he would be able to recover after a few decades of cultivation. It was better than having his soul destroyed. Moreover, in the current situation, he was like a fish on the chopping block, so he had no choice but to agree. If this Taoist could fight with his uncle master until both sides were injured, that would be the best. After thinking about it, he lowered his head and said, "Yes, I'm willing to serve Taoist." Zhang Yan pointed at the cave door and asked, "What's the arrangement behind the cave?" Reporting to Taoist, behind the rock wall, there is a bronze mirror hanging. If someone passes by, my uncle master, who is thousands of miles away, will be able to detect it. However, when I came here, I tricked that junior sister of mine. The incantation is here. As long as I recite it, there will be no hindrance." Shen Ying immediately recited the incantation. Zhang Yan performed the incantation and knew that it was not fake. Then he turned into a cloud of smoke and brought Shen Ying out of the cave. After he settled down, he turned around to look, and sure enough, he saw an ancient bronze mirror hanging above him. He couldn't help but smile. Even though this arrangement is simple, it isn't easy for someone who doesn't know the ins and outs to break it. Shen Ying hurriedly agreed. His expression was flattering, as if he was trying to please him. Zhang Yan smiled and turned his head to look. He saw that there was only a deep path in front of him. It was a slope. It seemed to go up. He didn't say much. He waved his sleeves and billowing smoke rose up. Like a tide, he flew towards the exit of the demon cave. Chapter 363. P.S. Tomorrow at midnight. In the Cave of Secrets, smoke curled up from the incense burner in the room. 2 Taoists sat opposite each other. The Taoist with disheveled hair was the cave master, Yugu Xie. The one sitting opposite him was his Xixiang, Guananxing. This person was no more than 3 feet tall and looked like a child. The wrinkles on his face were like the wrinkles of a withered tree. His eyes flashed with an ominous glint. He looked at Yugu Xie and said in a hoarse voice, "Shitty, this pair of demons is rarely seen in 100 years. If we can capture them, we can each have one. Who knows, we might be able to refine them into a good blood soul and increase our cultivation. This is a rare opportunity. Why don't you come with me? If we let those old fellows take them, won't we have to look at their faces in the future?" Yugu Xie avoided his gaze and said, "Xixiang, about this. Let me think about it carefully." Guananxing was not angry. He let out an unpleasant laugh and stood up. He said, "No rush, no rush." Shitty, why don't you think about it for a few more days? I will wait here for your good news. Yugu Xie stood up and politely sent him out. His eldest disciple, Qian Yi, looked outside. Seeing that Guananxing had completely disappeared, he came forward and said in a low voice, Master, why didn't you agree to him? Yugu Xie looked at him with displeasure and said coldly, What do you know? We have the little devil's cave in our hands. What demon can we not get? Why do we need to spend so much effort to find them? If this demon is really as good as old Devil Gui said, why would only our two sects covet them? There will be countless people watching. Instead of fighting to the death, it is better to stay here and cultivate. You should also calm your mind and stop thinking about useless things. Qian Yi was reprimanded, but he didn't care. Instead, he said, Master, disciple said something I shouldn't have said. The Little Devil's Cave is under the jurisdiction of the Azure sect. We might have a conflict with them at any time. This is not a long-term plan. Yugu Xie snorted disdainfully and said, Last time, we killed a few Australian Song disciples and a few of them escaped. Although a nascent soul cultivator came down to investigate, it was just a false story. He went back after one round, leaving the matter unsettled. If the Australian Song sect really wanted to interfere, how could there be no movement for more than 20 years? Your worry is really unnecessary. Qian Yi still wanted to say something, but Yugu Xie became impatient. He flicked his sleeve and said, All right, you can leave. Right, go call junior brother Qihan over. Qian Yi lowered his head and said, Yes, then I will take my leave. Yugu Xie's eyes fell on the table. He picked up a letter that had been opened long ago and read it again. Then he walked around the cave with his hands behind his back, as if he was thinking about something. Not long after, footsteps sounded behind him. A thin young cultivator with delicate features walked into the room and bowed. Disciple Han Ji greets Master. Yugu Xie turned around and showed a kind smile. He said, Disciple is here. Sit, no need to stand on ceremony. Han Ji bowed again and waited for Yugu Xie to sit down before he took a seat next to him. Yugu Xie said slowly, I called you here to ask you a question. Han Ji sat up straight and said seriously, Master, please speak. Yugu Xie's gaze drifted to the outside of the cave and said, I heard that after the great competition, the Ao Tsang sect has been hunting down our demonic disciples everywhere. A few days ago, they even sent one of the top 10 disciples, Ning Chongxian, to kill that old demon, Shiwuzi. You're from the Han clan. In your opinion, would they also do something in the little demon cave? Han Ji lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then he said, Master, it's hard to say. The Little Devil Cave was originally under the name of Shouming Palace. Jinren Pering, who was guarding this place before, was very low-key and never wanted to cause trouble. So we could come and go without any trouble. But now that the grand competition is over, I heard that this Jinren's status is different from the past. Moreover, the Little Devil Cave is the backyard of her cave. In my opinion, the demon path is about to prosper, and the Ao Tsang sect will not ignore it. It's just a matter of time. Yugu Xie's expression became a little solemn. He sighed and said, What you said makes sense. If one day we are really forced to give up this place, it will be a pity. It seems that we can't stay here for long. We need to find a way out. He frowned and thought for a moment. Then he changed his tone and said, Han Ji, you have always been very insightful. In your opinion, should we agree to your Uncle Master's request or not? Han Ji thought for a moment and said in a low voice, In my opinion, since Uncle Master is so concerned about that devil, I'm afraid things are not that simple. Yugu Xie waved his hand and said, You don't have to worry about anything. You can say it directly. Han Ji cupped his hands and said, Then I will say it directly. But this is only my guess. If I am wrong, I hope Master won't blame me. Yugu Xie smiled and said, I won't blame you. Tell me quickly. Han Ji subconsciously lowered his voice and said, Master, I think that the key is not the pair of devils, but where exactly did they come from? Yugu Xie's body trembled slightly. Then, as if he had thought of something, his eyes lit up. He suddenly looked over and said, You mean, the devil's lair that we don't know where? Han Ji nodded seriously and said, Very likely. Yu Xie took a deep breath. His fists under the sleeves of his robe loosened and tightened, then loosened and tightened again. There used to be 10 great devils' lair in the Donghua continent. Tens of thousands of years ago, when the fortune of the Xian men was at its peak, they had destroyed and suppressed 4 devils' lair underground palaces. Until now, no one knew where the remaining 4 were. But now, the demon gate was about to prosper. The heavens would change, and the devil's lair would appear one by one. If someone could occupy it first, as long as they could hold on to it, even if they did not become the ancestor of the sect, at least becoming a grotto heaven would not be an extravagant hope. Thinking of this, his heart also heated up. He lightly slammed his fist on the table and said, "Makes sense." He was also a cave master. Previously, he did not realize this because he had the devil's lair in his hands and did not want to cause trouble. Thus, he resisted in his heart and tried to evade it. But now that Han Ji had pointed out this layer of window paper, he immediately came to a realization. However, this matter would not be so simple. With his strength alone, wanting to occupy the entire devil's lair was also wishful thinking. He was silent for a while, thinking things through in his mind. Then he turned around, picked up a brush, and wrote a letter. He did not seal it and just handed it to Han Ji. He pointed at it and said, "Among my disciples, you are the most level-headed and have the highest vision. I can entrust you to this. Take this letter and immediately set off to that sect. Remember, you have to personally deliver this letter to your grandmaster. Do not trust anyone easily. If you do not see the grandmaster, do not come back." Han Ji was stunned. Then he immediately stood up. He did not ask what the matter was. After receiving the letter, he bowed respectfully and retreated. He left the cave abode and then rode a blood-colored mystic light toward the west. Just now, he had not gone far when a majestic cloud of smoke with an extraordinary aura came from the horizon and landed at the foot of the mountain with a loud bang. Because he did not have any intention of concealing himself, he immediately attracted the attention of the disciples guarding the mountain. They were all people with sharp eyebrows and could naturally tell from the cloud that the other party was a disciple of the celestial sect. Moreover, his cultivation was not ordinary. It was very likely that he was a core formation cultivator. Their hearts unconsciously tightened. However, they had lived at the foot of this hidden owl mountain for dozens of years and did not have any enemies. Especially in the past 20 years, with the little devil's lair to capture devils, all of them immersed themselves in cultivation, and no one came to provoke them. For a moment, they were not sure whether the other party was just passing by or coming to pick a fight. After a discussion, the 2 disciples decided that one would report to their master, and the other would come to inquire. Zhang Yan walked slowly up the mountain alone. The disciple who flew oversaw his free and unfettered appearance from afar and did not dare to look down on him. When he came close, the disciple stopped the flying light and landed. He cupped his hands and said, "Taoist, please stop. If you go any further, you will be in the territory of my secret cave. We have never accepted foreign guests. Please state your purpose for coming." Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands and said, "I am here to see the cave master of this place and not let him down." The disciple was stunned and his expression became more respectful. He returned the greeting and said, "So you are an acquaintance of my master. May I know how I should address you?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I am Zhang Yan. Go back and report, just say that someone from Ao Tsang sect has come." Hearing that he was from Ao Tsang sect, the disciple was shocked. He could not care about anything else and hurriedly went back to report. Zhang Yan didn't move forward either. Instead, he stood there quietly without moving. Not long after, he saw a blood-red cloud rising into the sky like a firework. He squinted his eyes to take a closer look and saw that the cloud was bright and dazzling, without the slightest hint of evil or demonic chi. It was just a big red ball, gathered together, like the sun shining in the sky. He knew that the cultivation technique was profound, and it should be the owner of the cloud. When Yu Xie heard that the person from Ao Tsang sect was the famous Zhang Yan, he was also shocked. But it was not good to hide, so he immediately showed himself. After showing off for a while, He landed on the ground and turned the blood cloud into a big red robe. He stared at Zhang Yan and cupped his hands and said, "So it is Ao Tsang sect, ranked 9th among the top 10 disciples. May I know why you are here?" Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said indifferently, "Nothing else. I am here to ask fellow you. You trespassed into my sect's territory and killed my disciple without asking. What is the reason for this?" Yu Xie was silent for a while. Then he snorted and said, "Since you already know, then I have nothing else to say. It's just a fight between us." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That is exactly what I wanted." Yu Xie said coldly, "If I win, I will definitely refine fellow Taoist's corporeal body into a demonic artifact. I will definitely not disgrace fellow Taoist. If I lose, I will allow Taoists to do as you please. However, can you let my disciple go?" Zhang Yan shook his head and sighed. "If you don't remove the roots, it will grow again when the spring wind blows." Yu Xie's eyes became cold. He stared at Zhang Yan and said, "Fine, then let me experience fellow Yu's brilliance." But right at this moment, the sound of a gong rang out from the clouds in the sky, and a ray of blood-red light flew over. It circled in the air and landed on the ground, revealing an ugly boy. It was Guananxing, and behind him were 2 disciples. They were also covered in red clouds, and it seemed that their cultivation levels were not weak either. He laughed strangely and said, "Junior brother, I just now heard from my disciple that someone is bullying your territory. Don't panic. Why don't you and I work together to kill this person and then go find the demon? Wouldn't that be great?" Yu Xie sneered. "Since senior brother is interested, how can I spoil your fun? But since we've already made our move, we can no longer hold back. If we let this person leave today, we will never have a day of peace." Guananxing laughed out loud. He licked his lips and glared at Zhang Yan. Ferocious light shot out from his eyes as he said in a harsh tone, "I happen to be in need of a suitable blood soul. Since you don't know what's good for you, I will use you to refine." At that moment, 2 more blood clouds flew over from the sky. Yu Xie landed on the left and right of him. One of them was his eldest disciple, Qian Yi. He cupped his hands and said loudly, "Master, we have already checked outside. This person came here alone. No one from the same sect came with him." Just now, when Yu Xie found out that Zhang Yan had come, he also felt fear in his heart. He was afraid that the Ao Tsang sect had come to take his life today, so he secretly sent disciples to investigate. It seemed like there were many people. When he heard that Zhang Yan had come alone, he unconsciously relaxed and his spirits rose. He looked at Zhang Yan and said with a smile, "Priest Zhang, I have also vaguely heard of your abilities, but did you not think that my senior brother is a guest in your residence? You have made a mistake by coming here alone today." At that moment, Zhang Yan was facing a total of 6 Blood Soul Sect core formation cultivators, but he stood there with a calm expression, without the slightest fear. He said indifferently, "In I's eyes, all of you will be dead souls under my sword in a moment. One more or one less, it is all the same." As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of sword light flashed out swiftly and fiercely. Chapter 364. Yu Xie and the other 5 came from the demonic path. If they were not at the end of the road, they would not choose to fight head-on. At this moment, the 6 of them had the upper hand, at least on the surface. They themselves thought so, so when they saw Zhang Yan's sword light fly out, their first thought was not how to counterattack, but to retreat in all directions. It was just that the sword light was too fast. Just a moment ago, each of them had a cut on their bodies, and their bodies were all broken. However, in the next moment, the 6 of them flashed like shadows and merged back together. Zhang Yan pulled the sword beam apart and spun it back and forth, driving the 6 of them further away. He laughed and said, "So that's how it is. All of you are just a bunch of people hiding in the back, not daring to fight me openly." Yu Xie had come out to meet him so boldly just now, so Zhang Yan suspected that this person had not come with his true body. As he expected, not only this person, but the 6 people in front of him had all come with the blood soul avatars. As expected, it was difficult to tell the real from the fake. Just like living people, it was difficult to see through them with the naked eye. However, the further the blood soul was from the true body, the less magic it could use. If he guessed correctly, this person's true body should be hiding in the cave, watching from afar and controlling the blood soul to fight outside. This was also the habit of demonic path cultivators. If they couldn't figure out the details of their opponent, then they would prioritize saving their own lives, and injuring the enemy came second. But once they saw through their opponent, they would no longer be polite. They would only stop after killing their opponent. His guess was not far from the truth. Not only was Yu Xie's guess correct, even Guananxing was a cautious person who cherished his life. Even if he had the upper hand, he wouldn't easily reveal his true self. Besides, this was how blood soul sect's cultivation method worked. They didn't think that it was a loss of face. Only by surviving would they have the right to mock their opponents. That was why they all hid in the cave. If the battle went badly for them, they would be able to escape. He would immediately think of a way to escape. Zhang Yan's sword light circled around them, forcing them back. Then he took out a Dharma art. There was a loud bang, like the beating of a drum. The black-yellow hand rushed out from the top of the door. It spread its 5 fingers, and in an instant, it grew to a size of 600 feet. His palm pressed down, covering the top of the mountain and grabbing at the 6 of them. Yu Xie and Guananxing's cultivation were more profound. When they saw the mighty and heavy hand pressing down in the haze above them, their expressions changed slightly. Without any hesitation, the disciple behind Guananxing was too slow and couldn't dodge in time. He was grabbed by the large hand and crushed into pieces. He turned into streaks of bloody light and flew away. The disciple sitting in the cave instantly turned pale, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He formed a few seals and gathered the shattered blood light back together. However, when the blood light reappeared, it was already too late. However, when it appeared again, it was no longer similar to his true body. Instead, it was a blurry figure that seemed to be heavily injured. Zhang Yan's eyes turned, and he saw the weakness of this blood soul sect. Although this vicious thing could be killed by Dharma treasures and flying swords for a moment, if it was attacked, it would not be completely unharmed. Yu Xie and Guananxing had solemn expressions. They were not in a hurry to attack. Instead, he circled around with his disciples. A few blood-colored shadows circled around Zhang Yan, looking for flaws and gaps. From time to time, they would let out shrill cries that sounded like crying and sobbing, as if they could stir one's heart. Zhang Yan's mind was firm and unwavering. The star's sword pellet seemed to have transformed into a blue rainbow, dragging a line of resplendent splendor as it flew around him. It was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Its speed was unpredictable. It hovered in midair above the heaven and earth palm, secretly intimidating, as if it could fall at any time. Including the time he defeated Li Wide 20 years ago, this was the second time he fought openly with Devil Sect cultivators. He thought that when the Devil Calamity came in the future, he would definitely fight with more and more Devil Sect disciples. Although he had to take down these people now, he also had to see their techniques so that he could have an idea in the future. Therefore, he was not in a hurry to counterattack. He only defended 70% and attacked 30%. If the other party got close, he would force the sword light back. If it went far, he would not chase and only defend the 100 feet under his feet. Yu Xie probed a few times, but he was unable to enter the battle circle. Seeing that Zhang Yan was calm and composed, without any signs of anxiety or impatience, he knew that he was from an orthodox Shenman. The aura of his technique was extremely long, and the other party's defense was strict. It seemed that if they continued fighting like this, there would be no victory or defeat even after a day and night. Suspicion rose in his heart, and he thought to himself, "This Zhang Yan is so calm. Could it be that he is restraining us here and waiting for his fellow sect members to come and help?" According to common sense, this thought of his did make some sense. Moreover, he was different from Guananxing. The disciples of the cave abode were all here. If they were killed, the 100 years of hard work would go down the drain. At that moment, he became even more suspicious. After thinking about it, he felt that since Qinsong School already knew of his actions and even sent the top 10 disciples to chase after him, he could not go to the little devil's cave anymore. He needed to take down this person as soon as possible, and then leave this place with everyone was the best plan. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of turning around and leaving, but he'd clearly seen Zhang Yan's sword sphere. If he kept running away, losing face was a small matter, and his disciples would probably be wiped out by Zhang Yan. That was something he absolutely didn't want to happen. Therefore, the only thing he could do was to fight. Even if he could not kill this person, he had to fight until he had no strength to chase after him. He pondered in his heart and felt that Zhang Yan had the protection of this mysterious hand on the outside and the sword pellet on the inside. Both of them could attack and defend at the same time. If he was alone, it would be difficult to take down this person in a short period of time. Thinking about this, he gave Guananxing a look. Seeing that the latter understood his meaning, he nodded in response. Thus, Yugu Xie let out a shout and shook his body. 7 blood spirits appeared, and like a general commanding an army, they stood on the left and right. However, the faces of these blood spirits were blurred, and their bodies were like shadows. They looked like a bloody light. Ever since he had obtained the Little Devil's Cave, he had cultivated 12 blood spirits in the past 20 years. Although they were not as condensed as the main soul, their ability to injure the enemy was not that bad. Now, in order to defeat Zhang Yan, he had taken out most of his family's resources. When his disciples saw this, they knew that their master was going to fight with his life on the line, and they all shouted and released the blood spirits. Guananxing laughed wildly. He did not want to be at a disadvantage. His body shook, and a red light spread out, and he released 6 blood spirits. The disciples behind him also followed suit. In a moment, there were more than 20 blood spirits flying around in the sky, and they let out shrill cries. The momentum was extremely frightening. Yugu Xie did not dare to underestimate Zhang Yan. He was afraid that he would not be able to defeat him, so he made a strange hand gesture and chanted a technique. In the blink of an eye, a treasure flew out from the cave. It was shaped like a shuttle, and it had a round head. However, if one looked closely, they would see that it was a pool of bloody liquid. It was thick and congealed, and it gave off a fishy smell. It attacked Zhang Yan. When it got close, just now, it could be clearly seen that there were countless small bloodworms entangled together. They were dense and constantly wriggling. It was enough to make one's scalp go numb. Blood thread goldworm? Guananxing's expression changed slightly. He did not think that his junior brother would have cultivated such a treasure. While he was secretly glad, he was also afraid. When he came here, he did not have any good intentions. He wanted to devour Yugu Xie's disciples, but because he saw that Yugu Xie's cultivation had improved greatly, he gave up on the idea. Fortunately, he did not attack him, or else he would not be able to defend against this thing. These bloodworms were formed after cultivating the blood yuan technique. They could devour flesh and blood, wear down spiritual light, and even contaminate treasures. With Yugu Xie's cultivation, it was already extraordinary to be able to cultivate more than 300 of them. However, there was once an expert in the Blood Soul sect who thought of a trick. He used a type of golden worm found in the Southern Cliffs continent as a substitute, and fed it with the blood worms that had yet to mature. In the end, he chose a worm head, and after refining it with his heart's blood, it could lead an entire nest of strange worms to attack the enemy. Although the golden worms only had a small portion of the original bloodworm's abilities after being refined, and they could not disperse and gather as they wished, they were still superior in numbers and their power was not small. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to withstand a single blow from them. In an instant, they would be sucked dry of their blood essence and bitten into a pile of rotten bones. However, Guananxing was also worried. In order to cultivate this kind of golden worm to this level, he needed a lot of bloodworms. Previously, he did not know how many demons had to be refined to achieve this level. Thus, he was even more certain that his junior brother must have occupied some devil's cave to be able to be so extravagant. However, with a great enemy in front of him, he did not have time to ask. He secretly thought about how to get this secret out of Zhang Yan after killing him. Zhang Yan saw the blood thread golden worm flying towards him. Before it even reached him, a fishy smell filled the air, assaulting his nostrils. He did not dare to act rashly. He made a hand sign and flipped the black and yellow hand so that the back of the hand was facing outwards, blocking the attack. In the blink of an eye, the two collided with each other. With a bang, the viscous liquid exploded and turned into countless tiny golden-headed flying insects. They buzzed and flew all over the sky. In the blink of an eye, the big hand shrank a lot, and the bloodworms all swelled up. Their originally shriveled bodies became extremely transparent, and the blood membrane on their wings could be seen clearly. It seemed that they had sucked all their essence. Seeing this, Zhang Yan shouted and used the Dan Sha Qi. The big hand shook and expanded, immediately shaking the bloodworms away. However, none of them were injured. Like mosquitoes smelling blood, they flew around in the air, and after a while, they all rushed towards the big hand. No matter how hard he tried, he could not drive them away. Seeing that Zhang Yan was entangled by the bloodworms, Guananxing did not mind taking advantage of the situation. He laughed and opened his eyes. The real body sitting in the cave opened his eyes and took out a red gourd with golden patterns. He lowered his head and bit off the stopper. With a point of his finger, he flew out of the cave and arrived at the top of the mountain. Seeing that Zhang Yan was entangled by the bloodworms, Guananxing did not mind taking advantage of the situation. He chuckled and opened his eyes. The real body sitting in the cave opened his eyes and took out a red gourd with golden patterns. He lowered his head and bit off the stopper. With a point of his finger, he flew out of the cave and arrived at the top of the mountain. His blood soul sensed something and immediately received it. He poured it down, and black smoke was thrown out. At first, there were only a few wisps, and then more and more black smoke came out. It seemed that there was no end to it. Everywhere it passed, the grass and trees withered, and the flowers and trees withered. It was as if a thick wall had been built, surrounding Zhang Yan. The disciples behind him also saw the opportunity. The real bodies in the cave took out their magic weapons and attacked. Qian Yi, the eldest disciple of Yugu Xie, was even more daring. He urged the two blood souls behind him to hide behind the thick smoke and stared in front of him. He was thinking that if Zhang Yan revealed even the slightest flaw, he would rush forward and devour his flesh and blood to nourish his body. Chapter 365. Seeing several magic treasures falling from the sky, Zhang Yan used the mysterious yellow hand and swept them away, not allowing them to get close to him. Yugu Xie had been watching Zhang Yan's actions. He was waiting for this moment. Seeing that there was a gap in Zhang Yan's encirclement, he felt that he had seized the opportunity. He smiled coldly and commanded the blood thread goldworms to throw themselves at him. Zhang Yan heard a buzzing sound in his ears. He raised his head and saw countless blood thread goldworms biting at him. He didn't panic. Without waiting for them to come close, his treasured robe naturally emitted a bright light. It extended half a foot, like a pearl, and blocked them all outside. However, these worms were indeed powerful. They didn't even let go of the protective light. They kept gnawing and devouring. In just a few breaths, they had devoured a layer of it. Zhang Yan was also shocked. At such a close distance, he could clearly see the bloodworms. They were as big as locusts, with golden heads and long bodies. Their mouths were like pincers, and there were antennae on their heads. Their feet were hooked, and they had 6 pairs of membranous wings on their backs. They looked very fierce. A thought flashed through his mind, and bits and pieces of information he had seen in Jing Luo Academy flashed through his mind. However, he didn't have the time to think too much about it now. He activated the treasure robe slightly, and the bright light immediately pushed outward, pushing the evil insects a bit away. Although he was unharmed, in the eyes of outsiders, he looked like he was covered from head to toe by the bloodworms. He was on the verge of death. Qian Yi had been hiding behind the black smoke. Seeing that he was being devoured by the worms, he was secretly delighted. This is my good fortune. The essence blood of a Xian Men disciple is a great supplement. After devouring it, my blood spirit will be as condensed as Master's. This opportunity doesn't come again. Even if I have to risk being punished by Master, I have to take the risk today. He was confident that after devouring Zhang Yan, his strength would greatly increase. Yugu Xie wouldn't do anything to him. Even if there was a little punishment, How could it compare to the benefits in front of him? Thus, he formed a method to not be injured by the blood thread goldworms. Then he rushed forward impatiently. Zhang Yan saw a streak of blood-red light suddenly rush into his body. At first, he was surprised, but then he smiled. Since the other party had delivered himself to him, he would not be courteous. His water elemental true light shone slightly, and a ray of watercolored brilliance flashed by, engulfing the other party. Then he disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan paid attention to the position of the 20-odd blood spirits in midair and calculated silently. He then secretly shook his sword pellet and released 16 sword lights. With a thought, he shot them up into the sky. When the Guo brothers saw that Zhang Yan was bitten by the bloodworm, they were delighted. All of them knew the power of the crimson bug. Even if they did not die immediately, they would not be able to hold on for long. Then, Gu Xie saw his eldest disciple Qian Yi rush forward without any orders. Instantly, he was a little unhappy. However, on the battlefield, it was useless to say anything. Moreover, it was better to let his disciple benefit than Guananxing. Just as he was thinking about how to teach Qian Yi a lesson, he suddenly saw a sword ray flying towards him, and he couldn't help but be startled. His reaction was also really quick. He immediately dodged to the side like a ghost. However, the sword ray was like maggots in a bone, and it was as fast as lightning. In an instant, it chased up to him, and in the blink of an eye, it had slashed tens of times on his body. Although his blood spirit was broken and then healed right away, it was after all fused with his soul. The sword light didn't feel good coming and going, and his true body was also in pain. He was forced by the sword light, and after dodging for a while, he unknowingly got a few steps closer to Zhang Yan. Besides him, the others in the surroundings were in such a sorry state as well. Some of them were forced back by a single sword light, some were forced back by 2 or 3 blood souls, and some were forced back by 2 sword lights. These sword lights moved about indeterminately as they interweaved and slashed at each other, and they came and went without a trace. Brilliant lights flickered chaotically while rays of rainbows shot out, and it caused them to be overwhelmed and flustered. Zhang Yan's actions were done after careful consideration. He wanted to force these blood spirits to come to him. Although the water element true light was powerful, it was not as fast as the flying sword. If it was released rashly, with the speed of the blood spirits, they would definitely be able to dodge in time. However, if he used the flying sword to restrain them and force them into the inner circle, then he would use the true light to attack, and he would be able to defeat the enemy in one move. After Guananxing was slashed a few times by the sword pill, he realized that something was wrong. He glanced around and saw that everyone's blood spirits were forced into the inner circle by the sword light, and they were actually extremely close to Zhang Yan. A sense of danger flashed in his heart, and he couldn't help but shout, "Be careful!" However, he realized it a little too late. Just now, he heard the sound of water in his ears, and a ray of water light flashed through the air, spreading hundreds of feet in an instant. Everyone only saw a flash of light, and the countless golden thread bloodworms and the rolling black smoke disappeared. At the same time, every single blood soul felt their bodies sink. They felt as if they were in the middle of a torrent that was surging towards them. That majestic power seemed to want to pull them in and tear them apart. They immediately felt that the situation wasn't good, and they struggled with all their might in an attempt to escape. Gu Xie and Guananxing were still fine. Although their souls were pulled over, the main soul that was similar to the real body could still hold on. However, their disciples were not so lucky, and they were swept away by the water one by one. The blood spirits rolled in the wave, and they were instantly shattered, unable to gather again. They weren't like their own masters, who still held back a bit, releasing all of their blood souls. These things were compatible with their minds, and now that they were released, the true bodies that were sitting in the cave all vomited blood endlessly, becoming fatigued. Gu Xie and Guananxing saw that the situation was not good. This main soul was their blood, and if they lost it, not only would their vitality be greatly damaged, they wouldn't be able to form it again even after a dozen years. Thus, they desperately channeled their spells, wanting to pull it out. Zhang Yan could feel the last 2 blood souls struggling to escape. He was about to use his core aura to increase his strength, but just as he was about to move, his eyes flashed and he thought of an idea. Not only did he stop exerting force, but he purposely relaxed his strength. Gu Xie and Guananxing thought that Zhang Yan couldn't continue, and they couldn't help but have some hope. They continued to channel their mana, and bit by bit, they pulled the blood spirits out of the water light. Zhang Yan faintly smiled. This was exactly what he wanted them to do. This way, the battle would become a tug of war. After all, the blood spirits were only blood spirits, and they weren't the main ones. Even if he killed them, this battle couldn't be said to be won. Only by capturing the two of them could he be considered to have achieved his goal. Thus, he thought of an idea to slowly wear down their mana. In order to save their blood spirits, Gu Xie and Guananxing had to continuously channel their qi. However, Zhang Yan's Dan Sha was vigorous, and he wasn't afraid of this kind of battle. This was where his advantage lay. Using one's strength to attack the enemy's weakness was the righteous path. As long as the battle dragged on, the opponent's cultivation would be exhausted, and they wouldn't even have the chance to escape. However, demonic path disciples had many tricks up their sleeves. Today, he planned to capture them all in one fell swoop, and he wouldn't let a single one go. Thus, at the same time, he made a spell and released an earth element true light. It spread out from beneath his feet, and as the Dan Sha circulated, it gradually covered the entire mountain. However, he still didn't feel satisfied, so he went deeper. After descending for several thousand feet, he reached halfway up the mountain, and just now he stopped. This earth element true light could condense earth into steel. After penetrating through the mountain rocks, it was the same as turning this part of the land into an indestructible cage. At this moment, he was circulating the water and earth element true lights at the same time. If this was when his Dan was of the first rank, it would have been a difficult task. However, after breaking through the shell gate, his mana had increased by more than double, and when he circulated it, it was as easy as lifting a heavy weight. Guananxing was also quite good. It didn't take long for him to realize that something was wrong. He immediately made a decision. He abandoned the blood spirits and flew towards Yu Gu Xie's cave. When he arrived outside, he shouted, "Junior Marshal Brother, you should make a decision. We aren't this person's opponent. Let's leave quickly." He wasn't a person who valued his fellow disciples. Yu Gu Xie's life and death had nothing to do with him. When he realized that something was wrong, he should have just left. However, according to his calculations, Zhang Yan was a sword cultivator. If he flew out rashly, how could he escape? Yu Gu Xie had been operating here for dozens of years. According to the temperament of the disciples of the demon sect, they wouldn't have left a way out in advance. There must be a secret passage set up here that allowed them to leave this place without being noticed. After he made this guess, he came here. Yu Gu Xie was originally a very decisive person. However, after nearly 30 years of peace and comfort, he actually hesitated for a moment. In his opinion, if he joined forces with Guananxing, they might be able to defeat Zhang Yan. However, at the moment, his senior martial brother didn't want to fight anymore, so he had no choice but to leave. However, they could escape, but his disciple couldn't. He was secretly hating in his heart. He sighed helplessly and said in a low voice, "Senior martial brother, follow me." Yu Gu Xie came out of the cave. The two of them rode on the blood cloud and headed towards the secret passage built underground. However, just now, when they were about to leave, they were shocked to find that there was a muddy yellow light covering the path in front of them. The light looked thick and solid, as if it was solid. The two of them instantly felt that something was wrong. Guananxing was even more anxious. He shouted and sent out a blood light to collide with the light. However, it was like a dragonfly trying to shake a pillar. It didn't move at all. He couldn't help but be speechless. For people like them who used demonic arts to injure and seize souls, they were experts at it. However, to break through this earth element true light, they wouldn't be able to do so in a short period of time. Unless they were a strength path cultivator like Su Yihong, with a divine weapon in hand, they would be able to use brute force to force it open. Their movements were immediately noticed by Zhang Yan. He sneered and urged the water elemental true light. The brilliance of the light instantly grew by a few degrees and swept the two blood soul beasts into it. Then, he waved his big sleeve and rushed into the cave. Yu Gu Xie and Guananxing used a few secret arts in succession, but they were still unable to break through the earth element true light. They now knew that they were trapped here. Now, they could only turn back and fight. For some reason, Yu Gu Xie felt relaxed in his heart. He looked at Guananxing with some schadenfreude and said mockingly, "Senior brother, it is I who has dragged you down." Guananxing's expression was ugly. He originally came here to investigate the background of this junior brother. Now, not only did he not obtain any benefits, he was even dragged into this for no reason. He might even lose his life. It really wasn't worth it. However, the current situation didn't allow him to have other thoughts. The only way to survive was to defeat the enemy above him. He spat on the ground and cursed, "Junior brother, what's the use of saying all this? Since I've been forced into a dead end, then I'm just fighting with my life. It's not like I haven't done it before." That Zhang Yan is one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong School. Exchanging my life for his, it's worth it. Chapter 366. Ignoring Guananxing's ruthless words, Zhang Yan collected all the blood souls outside the door and went into the Dead Chance cave. He had already asked Xin Ying and understood that this Yu Gu Xie did not have the ability to set up a forbidden formation. Especially after he circled around the outside, he saw clearly that there was indeed no forbidden formation protecting the place. Just now, he dared to break into this place. Setting up a forbidden formation was not something everyone could do. One needed to have formation flags and magic treasures, or have a person who was proficient in formations. Even in Qinsong School, all the formations on the Spirit Peaks and Islands were set up by one of the 9 academies, the Fangchen Courtyard. Most of the disciples knew nothing about it. Among the people of the 10 Great Heavenly Abode, only Mengjin knew a thing or two. It could be seen that there were very few people who were proficient in this. Yu Gu Xie was just an ordinary elder of the Blood Soul sect. He did not get along well with his fellow sect members, so he did not have either. He only dug a secret passage in the back mountain, but he was stopped by Zhang Yan. Therefore, Zhang Yan didn't have to worry about anything. He was extremely agile when he walked. Whenever a disciple from the cave came up to block his way, he didn't even look at them. He just released the water elemental true light and swept them away in a flash. Along the way, he killed everyone he saw. Those few core transformation realm disciples still had some courage and wanted to come out to block him. However, he had just destroyed their blood souls and their vitality was greatly injured. At this moment, they did not have the strength to fight back. If they bumped into him, they would be taken away in an instant. Zhang Yan woke up unhurriedly. He found out that a lot of effort had been put into the construction of this cave dwelling. This cave was divided into 6 floors. Each floor was 1,000 feet wide and 30 feet high. Looking at the walls, there were also many glass lamps hanging. Pearls and corals made it easy for people to see. It was as bright as the outside world. In this cave, other than these demonic path disciples, there were also mortal servants who did not have any cultivation. Right now, it was as if a great disaster was coming. They all screamed and fled in all directions. The ground was covered with broken utensils and precious porcelain. Zhang Yan was not in the mood to pay attention to it. When he reached the 4th floor, suddenly he saw a figure clutching his chest as he stumbled out. This person was Qian Yi. When he saw Zhang Yan, he first trembled, then knelt down and begged for mercy. "Priest Zhang, please spare this lowly one's life. I will tell you a secret." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'm not free right now, let's talk later." He rolled up his sleeves and Qian Yi fell into the water element true light, disappearing in the blink of an eye. In less than the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. More than 50 disciples under Yu Gu Xie, including the dozen disciples brought by Guananxing, were all captured in one fell swoop. After passing the 5th floor, he slowly walked towards the 6th floor. When he arrived at the entrance of the cave abode, he saw bloody shadows ahead. 2 rays of bloody light suddenly flashed out from the corner without a sound. He smiled coldly and didn't use any cultivation method or Dao technique. He only used his core evil chi to block the two blood souls. He said loudly, "Fellow Taoists, why do you need to hide? Now that you have nowhere to go, why don't you come out and fight to the death?" Just as he finished speaking, Yu Xie's voice sounded from behind the bead curtain. He said with a threatening tone, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, us senior and junior brothers are not that easy to provoke. We naturally have a way to perish together with you. Don't go too far. With my disciples, you have already given an explanation to the sect. If you still think it is not enough, you can take all the things in the cave abode." Zhang Yan smiled lightly. He had already discerned that the two of them were only putting on a brave front but were cowardly at heart. Earlier, when he was annihilating their disciples, if they were to fight with all their might, then they would still have some courage. However, they were hiding and unwilling to come out, and they had already completely revealed their fear of death. Thus, he said, "Since the two of you are unwilling to come out, then this humble Taoist can only enter for a bit." Yu Xie shook his head at Guananxing. Although they cherished their lives, when they had reached a point where they could not retreat, they had no choice but to harden their scalps and fight for a path to survival. He said in a low voice, "Senior brother, this person's divine arts are powerful and he has the protection of a treasured robe. He is truly not easy to deal with. The two of us are indeed not his match. Now that we have lost all the disciples in our sect, let's go according to the plan we discussed earlier. I will execute the demonic technique. However, if I succeed, I hope that senior brother will protect me and protect my life. I will definitely thank you greatly. If I fail, senior brother, if you have the chance, run for your life." Guananxing snorted and immediately swore an incomparably vicious oath. Yu Xie nodded and immediately felt a lot more at ease. He sat on the ground and said, "Senior brother, please delay me for a moment." Guananxing did not reply. He shouted in a low voice and activated the blood yuan technique. In a flash, a large blood-red hand flew up from the top of the door, waiting in front of the door. After a moment, he saw a shadow flashing through the door. Knowing that it was Zhang Yan, he shouted and grabbed the large blood-red hand. Zhang Yan had already expected that the other party would not let him enter so easily. He did not panic and summoned the black-yellow hand and slammed it upwards. Guananxing was a core transformation third-tier cultivator and his cultivation was above Zhang Yan's. The blood hand was also pure and condensed. Now that he had activated his Shen technique, its power was not small. When the two collided, there was a tearing sound and half of the black-yellow hand was torn off. In an instant, the yellow fog that filled the sky exploded. However, he was also shocked by the force of the collision and let out a muffled groan. Although he was not injured, he had no choice but to retreat. Zhang Yan was only blocking him for a moment. Seeing that he was forced to retreat, he floated into the cave and hovered in the air. Then, he flicked his sleeve and cast a spell. The yellow mist was collected and formed into a huge hand that floated in the air. At this moment, Yu Xie, who was sitting on the ground, had already finished using the spell. His eyes opened and flashed with a blood-red light. Then he let out an ear-piercing scream. The skin on his body seemed to leak and suddenly collapsed. It was as if all the blood in his body had been sucked dry. A bloody shadow tore open his body and flew out, heading straight for Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan unconsciously focused his gaze and looked over. Shen Ying had never mentioned such a transformation before, so it seemed that he had never been taught it before. It must be some kind of secret, life-risking technique that was not taught to others. Zhang Yan did not dare to be careless. He released the water element True Light in an attempt to stop Shen Ying. However, right at this moment, Guananxing's eyes suddenly shone brightly, as if she had also seen an opportunity. She suddenly clenched her fists tightly, and her face flushed red. In an instant, a red, thin, and long needle that looked like a soldering iron shot out from the top of her head. In the blink of an eye, it flew over 10 feet towards Zhang Yan's face. After using this spell, his expression was also dispirited. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. Although Zhang Yan had forced Guananxing to retreat, he was still paying attention to this person's movements. At this moment, when he saw the small needle flying towards him, his reaction was extremely fast. With a thought, the star sword pill flew out and blocked in front of him. However, the blood needle was like a living thing. It sank down and flew towards his palm. In an instant, it pierced through the layer of light that was protecting his palm. At the same time, the blood needle also collapsed. At the same time, Yugushia saw that he had an opportunity. He suddenly let out a shrill cry and suddenly turned around. He turned into an illusory blood chi and burrowed towards the place where the light was broken. This was a desperate move. This spell was called Han-Yang Life-Ending True Spell, a secret spell of the Blood Soul sect. This spell required the sacrifice of 50 years of lifespan. Then, the cultivator would wrap his own blood and break out of the body. The speed of this spell was faster than lightning. As long as it burrowed into the opponent's body, if it was successful, it could destroy the opponent's soul. If he could return to the body within 10 breaths, then he could still live. If he couldn't, then his soul would be destroyed. He originally thought that Guananxing had already broken a hole on Zhang Yan's treasure robe. As long as he seized the opportunity and broke in, he would definitely be able to turn the situation around. However, he didn't expect that just now, when he burrowed into Zhang Yan's palm, it was as if he had crashed into an iron wall. He actually couldn't find a gap. He still didn't give up. In an instant, he repeatedly crashed into it more than 10 times. However, he still couldn't enter. He couldn't help but feel a trace of fear and despair in his heart. Zhang Yan let out a cold laugh. The light on the treasure robe merged together and squeezed him out. Then, he made a hand sign and suddenly there was a burst of celestial music. A dense mist spread out and a sparkling, 3 feet long jade slip flew out. It circled in the air and suddenly let out a happy cry. Then, it went straight towards Yugushia, who was about to dissipate. The jade slip burrowed into the dissipating shadow and trembled. Then, like a whale sucking in water, it completely sucked in the blood shadow. All of this happened within a few breaths. Guananxing turned pale with fright when he saw this. Releasing his life-blood needle was already an act of cutting off all means of retreat. Now that he had no more strength to resist, he subconsciously wanted to withdraw and fly away. How could Zhang Yan allow him to escape? His mysterious yellow hand grabbed forward and grabbed Guananxing. Guananxing was instantly terrified and actually cursed loudly. All kinds of filthy words came out of his mouth. He didn't have the slightest demeanor of a core formation cultivator. Zhang Yan didn't mind at all and said with a smile, "I've seen many cultivators wag their tails and beg for pity. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." He stretched out his hand and pointed at Guananxing. The stellar sword ball flew out and circled around his neck. Instantly, his head was cut off. Blood flowed all over the ground. Before he could say anything, the 9 subduing demon slip pounced on the corpse and in the blink of an eye, it sucked it up cleanly. However, the 9 subduing demon slip seemed to have a bigger appetite after sucking Gui Zongyao's corporeal body. It still refused to return and kept circling around Zhang Yan. It kept making whimpering sounds as if it was begging for food. Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile. He pondered for a while and said, "Fine, I'll let you have it easy today." He released his true light and left only Qian Yi in his hand. The rest of the disciples who were captured fell out and rolled all over the ground. The demon slip didn't hold back. It didn't care if these people were dead or alive. It just went into its nose and swallowed one of them. Then it went to the next person and did the same thing. In less than the time it took for a joss stick to burn, all the demon sect disciples on the ground were sucked dry. The demon slip seemed to be satisfied. With a happy cry, it shook its body and landed on Zhang Yan's hand. Without waiting for him to give an order, it returned the strands of vital essence to him. Zhang Yan was startled. This demon slip seemed to be different from normal ones. He didn't resist and let the vital essence enter his body. In just a moment, he felt something very different. Usually, after he felt the vital essence enter his body, it would go down to his abdomen. As long as he moved his martial arts, he would be able to nourish his flesh and blood. However, at this moment, he had a feeling of fullness and completion. His entire body seemed to be filled and full like never before. After probing a little, he was shocked to find that his primordial spirit was much stronger than before. Chapter 367. Most of the demon path and Xuanmen's cultivation were based on the qi path, but in terms of cultivation, they had their own emphasis. Xianmen focused on gathering vitality and cultivating essence qi, while the demon path preferred to kill and plunder, solidifying the spirit. For example, if a cultivator from the celestial sect of wonders died, most of the cultivation that he had painstakingly cultivated would immediately dissipate, leaving only a small amount of essence energy that was closely connected to his own soul, maintaining the soul from dissipating. This was the origin spirit. If the original spirit was not lost, they could still reincarnate as a human. If it was destroyed, the soul would scatter and no longer exist in the world. Therefore, the body of a Xianmen cultivator was the most important. Their foundation couldn't be damaged at all. On the other hand, the disciples of the devil sect were different. They focused more on condensing their souls and solidifying their original spirit. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they could still bring out most of the essence qi that they had painstakingly cultivated. If they could get another body, they would only need to spend a few days to cultivate their cultivation base back. However, in this way, without a physical body to rely on, the devil sect's disciples had no choice but to rely on external objects to deal with their enemies, such as using baleful yin qi, borrowing demons and ghosts, or absorbing blood essence. There were all sorts of strange methods, and there were many more. Zhang Yan's spirit contract demon technique was an ancient secret technique. Although it could strengthen the original spirit a little, it was of little value to him. His body was as hard as metal, hard to be damaged by heavenly weapons. If the day came when his body was destroyed, even if his original spirit was condensed, what use would it be? Just as he thought of this, he suddenly remembered that the last 6 stages of the divine contract were still in the demonic treasury. He hadn't read them yet, so there must be some other mysteries in them. After he returned to the cave abode, he might as well investigate it again. He stood in the cave and looked around. Yu Gu Xie was dead, so the matter here was over. He needed to return to the sect to explain. Thinking about this, his thoughts turned, but he wasn't in a hurry to leave. His shoulders shook, and he released the water element true light, throwing Qian Yi out. He used a small method to wake him up, and then asked, "Let me ask you, the secret you mentioned just now, what is it?" Qian Yi kowtowed repeatedly, then lowered his voice and explained Guananxing's purpose for coming here. He then said, "Taoist Zhang, I'm sorry. I tried every possible way to find out from Martial Uncle Gua's disciple that the origin of the pair of devils is very suspicious. Perhaps the devil's cave has appeared." When Zhang Yan heard this, he smiled and didn't mind. Tens of thousands of years ago, the 4 great devil caves had been destroyed by those powerful cultivators. But they knew that one day the world would change and the world would undergo a change. So they'd left behind various miraculous treasures in the devil's den. It was left for future disciples to take. However, if he took the treasures left behind by the great experts, he would also have to bear the karma. He would have to do his best to reseal the demonic cave. Moreover, Zhang Yan was busy cultivating now, and he was about to condense his true seal, so he naturally didn't have the mood to pay attention to such matters. He left Qian Yi behind. But because this person was Yu Gu Xie's eldest disciple, after cleaning up the last chance cave, he still needed to be captured as a witness. As for the secret, it was just a casual question. So he didn't say much, and with a shake of his sleeve, a human bag flew out and wrapped around the person's head. He threw the bag into the sleeve, then his feet stomped, and he turned into smoke and flew out of the last chance cave. After making 2 turns on the mountain top, he flashed and returned to Qinsong School. After flying for a few days, he re-entered the small devil's den and returned the way he came. It had been more than 2 months since he left. Mo Ying and the others were meditating, and a disciple in charge of checking the flags saw a smoke coming from afar. He was instantly overjoyed and said, "Look, Martial Uncle Zhang is back." Hearing that, all the disciples were overjoyed, and they all opened their eyes and stood up to welcome him. They had been in the depths of the devil's den for the past few days, and although their cultivation speed was extremely fast, Zhang Yan had been gone for a long time and hadn't returned. Therefore, they were a little uneasy and suspicious, and they weren't sure if they should leave earlier. Now that they saw this martial uncle with such high cultivation again, it was as if they had found a pillar of support, and their hearts calmed down. Zhang Yan came to the flying ship, and he looked around. After not seeing him for more than 60 days, the cultivation of the disciples had greatly increased. Especially Mo Ying and the other 3 disciples, they had already stepped into the mystic light realm. He nodded and smiled. There are 2 more days until the middle of the moon, and when the eye of the sea opens, I will bring all of you back. He shouted, and the rolling pill aura chi was released, which wrapped around the dozen disciples, and he flew toward the eye of the sea. This time, they didn't need to move slowly like when they came. He circulated the vast pill aura chi, and they continued to fly like shooting stars with the disciples. 2 days later, Zhang Yan followed the eye of the sea and returned to the Guardian Palace. After bringing the group of disciples up, he gave them some encouragement, and then he went into the palace to meet with Spiritual Master Peng. Spiritual Master Peng heard that he was returning to the palace, and she didn't waste any time. She immediately invited him to the front of the palace and asked slowly, "How did it go?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fortunately, I didn't fail you." He first told her what happened, then he threw out a human bag, pointed at it, and said, "Most of the people in the secret ending manor have been killed by me. This person is Qian Yi, the eldest disciple of Yugujia. I captured him, and it can be considered an explanation to the sect master." Spiritual Master Peng's phoenix eyes lit up. She raised her hand, and 2 maids brought Qian Yi back. She nodded at Zhang Yan and praised, "You did well in this matter, no one can hold anything against you." Zhang Yan heard the hidden meaning in her words, and said, "Please enlighten me, Spiritual Master." Spiritual Master Peng unfolded her sleeves and patted the armrest. She snorted and said, "A few days ago, someone suggested that you go to the Little Devil's Cave to suppress the devil like Zhuang Bufan. Although this is in line with the rules of the sect, the person who suggested it is not a good person. He wants you to not cultivate in peace. I argued with the sect master and said that you can definitely solve this matter. Just now, you have to go to the Devil's Cave." At this time, Zhang Yan knew the whole story, and his eyes couldn't help but flicker slightly. However, Spiritual Master Peng didn't mention this to him in advance, and it wasn't because she wanted to hide it. The 2 of them were now bound together for good or bad. Even if he failed, Spiritual Master Peng would find a way to cover for him. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your trouble, Spiritual Master." Spiritual Master Peng waved her hand and said, "This is a small matter, and it's over." She raised her wrist and gave out a Dharma token. Zhang Yan reached out and took it. Spiritual Master Peng said, 5 days ago, Huoxian asked the sect master to summon the top 10 disciples. At that time, you were still in the Little Devil's Cave and didn't know about this. Therefore, I sent the Dharma token to the guarding palace and waited for you to come out of the Devil's Cave to meet him. After all, he is now the top of the top 10 disciples, so he only needs to ask the sect master to order you to do something. I can't interfere too much, but you need to be careful." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your care, Spiritual Master. I will take my leave now." Spiritual Master Peng nodded and said, "Go." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and bowed, then left the room. He calculated in his heart. A few days ago, besides him, the top 10 disciples also had their own orders and went out. Now that he thought about it, there must be something important. Since Qi Yuntian's departure, Huoxian became the top of the top 10 disciples. It was the first time that he was summoning all the disciples, so he had to go. Thinking of this, he first used the Dharma token to tell Huoxian that he had come out of the Little Devil's Cave. After that, he meditated in the Keeper's Palace for half a day. When he was fully recovered, he activated the Sword Ray and flew toward the 10 Peaks Mountain. The highest point of the main peak was above the other 9 peaks. For more than 300 years, it had been occupied by Qi Yuntian. Now, Huoxian was also standing there, watching the clouds disperse and the wind flow, the sun rise and the moon set. When Zhang Yan arrived, he saw Huoxian standing on the top of the mountain. Although his expression was calm, his eyebrows were raised, and there was an irrepressible look in his eyes. Behind him stood 2 female disciples, and there was another person standing side by side with him. This person looked like he was in his 20s. His skin was fair and clean, and his appearance was delicate. He wore a light green robe and looked like a weak scholar. There was a smile on his lips, and his eyes were bright. It was obvious that he was a smart person. Seeing Zhang Yan coming over, Huoxian smiled warmly and said, "Junior brother, we have been waiting for you for a long time." Zhang Yan landed on the cloud and stood on the peak. He bowed and said, "Thank you for waiting, senior brother. Please don't take offense." Huoxian smiled and shook his head. "You went out on the orders of the sect master, how can I blame you? I was too eager to ask you to come here." He turned around and pointed at the weak scholar beside him. "I guess junior brother Zhang hasn't seen junior brother Zhong Muqing, right?" Zhong Muqing looked up and down at Zhang Yan. He smiled lightly and cupped his hands. "You must be junior brother Zhang Yan. I have heard of your name for a long time." Zhang Yan saw this person standing with Huoxian earlier, and he vaguely guessed his identity. He returned the greeting and said, "Senior brother Zhong, you are too polite." Back then, Zhong Muqing was Meng Zhen's disciple. There was a big change in the back gate, and he was asked to be Qin Jinren's disciple. But to take care of Meng Zhen's face, she asked him to be Qin Jinren's disciple in name, but in reality, she was the one who personally taught him Xian Qi. It was the same for the disciples of the aristocratic families. The 4 heaven Jinren of the aristocratic families were the same generation as the sect master. They had stopped accepting disciples a long time ago. Although Huoxian and the other 4 were the direct descendants of their sects, they were the grand disciples of the 4 Jinren in name. If Zhang Yan were to talk about seniority with Zhou Chongju, he would be 1 generation higher than Zhong Muqing. But now, they were all the top 10 disciples, so there was no need to care about this. Huoxian laughed loudly. He took out a scroll and said, "Today, I called junior brother Zhang here because there is an important matter. A few days ago, junior brother Fang was ordered to investigate a secret matter. There was a letter from Huanjin Temple, saying that in the northwest direction, there was spiritual qi soaring into the sky and treasure light shining in the sky. It seemed like a celestial residence had appeared. However, because there were demons wreaking havoc, it was suspected that the demonic cave had appeared. Now, Shaoqing, Yuanyang, Nanhua, Taihao, and other sects had also sent their disciples to that place, wanting to investigate it together. Junior brother Fang had already rushed there, but I was afraid that he might not be able to do it alone, while the other junior brothers had other important tasks, so I wanted to ask for junior brother Fang's help." Chapter 368. Hearing Huoxian's words, Zhang Yan first pondered for a while, then looked at him and shook his head, saying, "Senior Hua, forgive me for not being able to comply." Huoxian raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Zhang Yan. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "Junior brother, do you have any difficulties?" Zhang Yan smiled and said frankly, "Just now, I have returned from the devil's lair and have not yet returned to my cave abode, so I came here. If it was any other matter, it would only delay my cultivation for a few days. However, I am now in charge of the lower house, and in half a month's time, I will need to select a true disciple and send him to the upper house. At this juncture, how can I leave?" Huoxian could not help but be taken aback. He had thought that Zhang Yan might refuse, but he was confident that he would be able to convince him. However, he had never thought that Zhang Yan would give such a reason. How could he care about the trifling matters of the lower house? However, this matter was not big, but it was not small either. True disciples were the foundation of Qinsong School. According to the rules of the school, there was no reason to delay. Zhang Yan was in charge of the lower house. Without his seal, the meridian opening disciples could not go to the upper house. This reason was enough even if it was brought up to the schoolmaster. Huoxian could not help but frown. Although he was the top of the top 10 disciples, if he immediately used the schoolmaster's seal, he could force Huoxian to lower his head. However, he was ranked first among the top 10 disciples. If he were to order a disciple who was only ranked 9th, he would have to rely on the sect leader to suppress him. Once this news got out, people would look down on him and he would lose all his prestige. Zhang Yan stood there calmly without saying a word. This matter was actually easy to solve. They were all top 10 disciples, and he could not do things for free. The key was whether the price Huoxian was willing to pay was enough. He believed that Huoxian would be able to understand his meaning. At this moment, a trace of a smile appeared on the corners of Zhong Muqing's mouth. He first glanced at Zhang Yan, and then he cupped his hands towards Huoxian and said, "Senior brother Hua, in this little brother's opinion, junior brother Zhang has already broken out of his shell and is probably about to condense his mana and true seal. However, senior brother is chasing him around like this, causing him to be unable to cultivate in peace. This is not very appropriate." Huoxian glanced at him and nodded in agreement. "That's right, it's indeed unfair to junior brother Zhang. I wonder if junior brother has any brilliant ideas?" Zhong Muqing chuckled and said, "How about this? In the past, there was an elder in the Duzhen Hall who bestowed a true seal seed to me. But later on, I became a disciple of spiritual master Qin and he bestowed the seed to me. This thing is useless to me now. I'm willing to compensate you. What do you think?" When he said this, Huoxian couldn't help but be moved. After a core formation cultivator reached the second level, he would need to condense a true seal. However, how to condense a true seal was quite particular. No matter how good one's aptitude was, no matter how high the quality of one's core was, as long as one was careless, the condensed true seal would have some flaws. This would cause one's future cultivation to be unstable and might even be unable to successfully form a nascent soul. It wasn't easy for a cultivator to cultivate to this stage. Because the masters of the various families were afraid that their disciples would take the wrong path, they used their own essence qi as a guide to condense all kinds of profound principles and secret techniques on how to cross this threshold into a talisman for the younger generation to condense. This was the true seal seed. When a disciple condenses a true seal, if he gets this kind of seed, it was equivalent to pointing out a wide and bright path in front of him. There was no need for him to carefully explore and waste time. He only needed to follow the true seal seed and cultivate step by step. Within the true seal seed, because each family secretly passed down secret mental cultivation methods, it was usually not passed down to only direct disciples. Therefore, Huoxian and Zhang Yan were both surprised that Zhong Muqing was willing to generously take out this thing. Huoxian pondered for a moment and said, "This is too unfair to junior brother. Even if you don't use this, your disciple can use it." However, Zhong Muqing chuckled and shook his head. "It's fine. I'm a disciple of the enlightened master and naturally have an inheritance. I'm afraid I won't need this thing anymore. It's useless to keep it. I might as well do you a favor today and give it to junior brother Zhang." Huoxian looked at Zhang Yan and tried his best to speak in a calm tone. He asked, "Junior brother Zhang, what do you think?" Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he cupped his hands and said, "Since senior brother Zhong is so generous, I can't refuse anymore. How about this? Give me a few more days to settle the matters of the lower house before I leave. What do you think, senior brother Hua?" Seeing that he finally agreed, Huoxian was in a good mood. He said, "It's fine. Junior brother is in charge of the lower house. This matter must be handled properly. I originally wanted to invite junior brother to my residence. Since it's like this, I won't keep you." Zhang Yan roared with laughter, and then he immediately bid farewell to the two of them before he stood up and flashed out, transforming into a ray of icy cold light that shot off into the distance. After he left, Zhong Muqing also bid farewell to Huoxian and went to the Langya Grotto. His identity was special, so he entered the inner house without being announced and went to see immortal Qin. Along the way, he saw green smoke from the furnace in the cave, shrouding a pool of clear water. The fragrance of pink lotuses seeped into the spring. Amidst the smoke, he looked up and suddenly saw immortal Qin sitting cross-legged on a jade lotus. However, his figure was blurry, so he bowed and said, "Disciple greets immortal Qin." Immortal Qin said lightly, "You've seen that Zhang Yan?" Zhong Muqing replied respectfully, "Yes." Immortal Qin said, "What do you think of this person?" Zhong Muqing thought about it and decided to tell the truth. He said, It's only been 8 years since the competition. This Zhang Yan was originally a first-grade Dan, but now he has broken through the shell. It's really impressive. It surprised me. If he continues to cultivate like that, his cultivation will definitely get higher and higher, and it will be harder to treat him. Immortal Qin nodded and agreed. Muqing, you're right. Zhong Muqing raised his head and looked at Immortal Qin. He asked, it's just that there's something I don't understand. I wonder if Immortal Qin can explain it to me? Immortal Qin said, speak. Zhong Muqing gritted his teeth and bowed. I wonder why Immortal Qin wants to give this true seal seed to Zhang Yan? The reason why he went to Huaxian today was because he was ordered by Immortal Qin to find an opportunity to give this true seal to Zhang Yan. This matter was actually not easy to handle. Other than not letting the two of them see any flaws, he also had to grasp the timing. It took him a lot of brainpower. However, he had already secretly seen that the person who condensed the true seal was so powerful that it was almost unimaginable. Even with his eyesight, he could faintly feel that this person's cultivation was even stronger than Immortal Qin's. If he had not passed this stage long ago, he might not have been able to resist coveting it. However, he did not know why he gave it to Zhang Yan for no reason. Immortal Qin glanced at him and said with a smile that was not a smile, have you seen this seal? Zhong Muqing's body trembled. He hurriedly lowered his head and said, I was rash. However, Immortal Qin did not care and said, it doesn't matter if you have seen it. You are my capable disciple, I should tell you about this matter. This true seal seed is indeed rare. If the sect did not have the change 100 years ago, whoever obtained this kind of thing would be his good fortune. However, it is not possible now. When she said this, she snorted softly, as if there was some resentment, and said, this thing was left by my senior brother in the past. If Zhang Yan condensed the true seal according to the method, let's not talk about the reaction of the sect leader's senior brother, but if he walks outside, my senior brother will definitely sense it. Do you understand? Zhong Muqing was shocked. He thought of the shocking dharma during the Battle of the Three Pools and immediately understood. He thought of the reason and sincerely admired. Immortal Qin is indeed brilliant. Immortal Qin raised his hand and waved, saying, if you have nothing else, then you can leave. Zhong Muqing bowed and slowly left the cave residence. Immortal Qin stood up and stood there, looking at the pool of cold water under his feet. Since Immortal Peng stepped into the chess game, she could already feel that the matters in the sect were gradually getting out of her control. Especially recently, she increasingly felt that her hands and feet were tied. The previous feeling of being able to handle things with ease and detachment had long since disappeared. However, since they were both Taoist Dong Tian, she couldn't do anything to him. However, it was much easier to deal with Zhang Yan. Taking advantage of the fact that his cultivation was still shallow and he hadn't stabilized his footing, she could still restore some of the situation. After Zhang Yan left the Ten Peaks Mountain, he went all the way back to Zhao Yu Cave residence. He used the lower house as an excuse in front of Huaxian, but it was not without a purpose. In fact, it was just to delay time. He was not a reckless person. Not to mention that he had been warned by Immortal Peng to be careful. Even if he was really ordered to go out, he could not rashly agree to it. He had to understand the details before he could take action. Therefore, after he entered the main hall, he sent a talisman to Zhou Chongju to see if he could get some information. Then he entered the small pot mirror and sat on the bamboo building. He shook his sleeves and a loud sound was heard. A flying pavilion that was 10 feet high appeared. This building had 6 floors. On the eaves and pillars, there were all kinds of visible and ferocious beasts. It looked cold and quiet, full of evil spirit. He flicked his sleeves and jumped inside. He first came to the stone tablet that controlled the mechanism of the restriction. After standing for a moment, he reached out and put his hand on it, operating the divine contract cultivation method. Not long after, there was a slight vibration on his arm. He felt a rumbling sound coming from the entire devil treasury. He immediately realized that the 5th layer of restriction had been opened. He could not help but feel happy. In the past, he could only reach above the 4th layer, but now that he had cultivated to the peak of the divine contract cultivation method, he wanted to give it a try. Sure enough, he opened the restriction in one fell swoop. He tapped his feet, floated up along the staircase, and landed on the 5th layer. He swept his gaze around and saw that the interior of the pavilion was built with white jade. However, there was a strange astrological diagram drawn on the ground. Even with his knowledge, he was unable to identify its origins. After a few glances, he looked around and finally found the 4th to 6th layer of the divine contract cultivation method on a white jade wall in the corner. He carefully read the set of cultivation method and found that it was more complicated than the previous 3 layers of the divine contract cultivation method. However, it still required him to kill people and use the devil's slip to absorb their flesh and primordial spirit, especially the disciples of the devil sect. As he was reading, the mirror spirit came out and held up his hands, saying, "Master, there is a flying letter from outside the mansion. Please have a look." Zhang Yan took it and looked at it casually. He thought it was a letter from Zhou Chongju, but when he looked at the inscription, it was Qin Ma Bai. Chapter 369. Sipt, C equals. Placiate equals 3274. Zhang Yan saw that it was the sect leader who had personally sent a letter. For a moment, countless thoughts ran through his mind, trying to guess what it was for. See. After opening the letter, he took out the paper and read it carefully. After reading it, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. Even though he prided himself on being daring, he was still shocked by the contents of the letter. The sect leader wanted him to take advantage of Hu Xian's order. This trip was just right for him to do something big. It was just that this matter was too dangerous. If he wasn't careful, he would die. Therefore, the sect leader promised in the letter that if Zhang Yan did this matter well, the sect leader would secretly teach him one of the 12 techniques. Zhang Yan put down the letter and paced back and forth in the hall. Although the top 10 disciples were glorious, if it was a few hundred years ago, they could cultivate in peace. They didn't need to go out to cultivate to the Yuanying realm. But now that the demonic tribulation was about to start, no one dared to say that they could safely pass through it. Even if he cultivated in the sect, he didn't feel very safe. Moreover, the 16 sects were about to fight. As for the specific day, due to the influence of the demonic tribulation, the sect leader of the top 10 profound sects hadn't decided yet. But at the latest, it would be within the next few hundred years. After that, they would probably have to fight with the demon sect. The only thing he could do now was to work hard to raise his cultivation level before then. Only then would he have a chance to survive this tribulation. But if he wanted to cultivate to the Yuanying realm within 100 years, he didn't have full confidence. But before him, the art of comprehending the divine contract allowed him to see another path. This method was nothing more than killing the demon sect disciples. If he could raise his cultivation level to the Yuanying realm first, with his strong body, he wouldn't attract too much attention and he wouldn't have the ability to protect himself. He would be able to deal with the tribulation. If he killed more demon sect disciples, would he be able to refine the spirit contract to the 4th level, which was equivalent to the Yuanying realm? Zhang Yan abruptly stopped in his tracks. It seemed that he had to go to Mount Qingtong. According to the letter, although this trip was extremely dangerous, if what the letter said was true, he glanced at the broken soul contract art. It could help him solve a big problem. Moreover, on the other hand, wasn't this his chance? Didn't the sect leader entrust this matter to him mean that he trusted him? He took out the letter, and at the end, there were 3 talisman cards. His eyes flashed. This risk was worth taking. This trip was no small matter. Since he had already made up his mind, he naturally had to make some preparations. He counted the days and thought about it carefully. Currently, he didn't lack any medicinal pills. After annihilating the Su clan, Zhou Chongju had obtained more than 10,000 pieces. Coupled with the fact that Zhou Chongju would occasionally order people to send some over, other than for his disciples to use for cultivation, it was more than enough to deal with this trip. There was no need to search anymore. It's just that the letter mentioned that in Gushangzhe, there was a yin wind howling and wreaking havoc, so much so that it was not inferior to the little cold world. He must bring along this spring coming bottle, which contained a river of Huanyang wine. It was enough for him. Then he thought for a moment and said, "Where is the mirror spirit?" The mirror spirit heard the voice and came out. She bowed deeply and said, "Master, I am here." Zhang Yan threw out a sleeve, pointed at it and said, "Take a look at this thing. Can you open it?" This sleeve was left behind by Xiao Mu. The reason why Zhang Yan didn't open it all these years was because he was afraid that if he moved it rashly, he might set up some restriction talisman and accidentally be discovered by the Xiao clan. That would be bad. Secondly, he was afraid that his cultivation was still shallow. Even if he opened the sleeve, he would damage the things inside. Then the loss would outweigh the gain. Moreover, he had many magic weapons on him, so he didn't have the mood to touch them. That was why he had never opened it. Now that he was going to Mount Qingtong, he couldn't ignore anything that could save his life. So he decided to open it and see if there were any treasures that could help him. The mirror spirit took a look and smiled faintly. She said, "Master, in this sleeve, someone cast a few insignificant restrictive spells. If you don't want to damage the things inside, give me 5 or 6 days, and I will be able to open it." Zhang Yan couldn't help but feel happy. He said, "Only 5 or 6 days? Okay, you can take it and refine it first. I will look for you in 7 days." The mirror spirit bowed and left to accept the order. Zhang Yan sat on the jade couch and calculated in his heart. Since the day of the grand competition, he had been refining the Dan Sha in the cave residence. He didn't have the time to refine the serene in heavy water. Since he had to go to that dangerous place in a few days, he might as well take this opportunity to do it today. Thinking of this, he stepped out of the master mansion and entered the clear nether heavenly lake. He took out the tri-primordial chaos water banner and shook it in his hand. In an instant, the waves roiled and white foam flew everywhere. They parted to the sides and revealed a path ahead. He gathered his fiendish core and walked down the mist, heading towards the depths of the heavenly lake. After walking for thousands of feet, he glanced around and saw that this place was grotesque and dazzling. There were all kinds of fish, shrimp, and turtle spirits swimming around. He didn't want to look any longer. Another thousands of feet down, there were more strange fish and strange insects. Some were dozens of feet big, their eyes were like lanterns and their scales were like blades. Although they looked fierce, they were timid like mice. Some were as small as a baby's fingers. They came in groups and ran amok. Wherever they passed, the big fish and small insects all retreated. Zhang Yan thought, although I live in this clear serenity heavenly lake, I still don't know how deep this place is. The serene in heavy water needs a lot of nether chi. Although this place is enough, the deeper I go, the more it will precipitate. Why don't I go down and take a look? He waved the banner again and went another thousands of feet down. At this time, the surrounding in currents were bursting and even he felt the chill penetrating into his bones. He took out the spring-coming bottle and drank a few mouthfuls of Huanyang wine. This thing was wonderful. Just like in his stomach, his limbs were smooth and his body was warm again. He smiled and went down another thousands of feet, but he still couldn't see the end of the heavenly lake. He couldn't help but be amazed. However, there was already enough nether chi in this place. It was useless to go any further, and it might even affect his cultivation. Therefore, he pointed his finger and stopped the banner. Then he released the pill evil chi, which turned into a pure white cloud and sat in the air. He made a hand sign and in a split second, the 365 drops of serene in heavy water leaped out from the top of his head. He used the hand sign and without needing to use much strength, the heavy water swelled and shrunk. It rotated slowly as if it was breathing and sucked in the surrounding nether chi. This cultivation took 6 days and 6 nights. Zhang Yan had just now refined the 365 drops of serene in heavy water again. With a slight movement, all of them responded like the tide and moved according to his heart. They seemed to be even more agile than before. He let out a long laugh. With a shake of his shoulder, he collected the heavy water and waved his sleeves. He flicked his sleeves again and took back the Tri-Elements mixed water banner. He no longer used it but released the star's sword ball. It turned into a sharp sword light and flew through the water. In just a moment, he broke through the cold current and stepped back into the main mansion. He had just sat on the jade couch when the mirror spirit came. She held the sleeve bag and said respectfully, Master, the restriction on this thing has been refined by me. Thanks to Master, there is no defect inside or outside. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. He took the sleeve bag and transferred a spiritual qi into it. He opened the seal and looked inside with his mind. After a little identification, he found that although this sleeve bag wasn't a treasure bag, it was divided into 5 layers. The items inside were arranged according to categories, which saved him some trouble. He looked at the first layer first and saw that there were a lot of things inside. Just the bottles and jars of medicinal pills almost filled a corner. There were also many other things such as spiritual herbs, strange stones, and so on. He could name most of them, so it wasn't rare. In the second layer, there were 12 jade boxes placed neatly. He raised his eyebrows, took them out and opened them. He found that they were 12 superior spiritual swords. He picked one up in his hand and held it in front of his eyes. He saw the cold light and the coldness pierced his skin. He gently flicked it with his finger and it made a clear sound. He couldn't help but nod. He carefully looked at the seal on the body of the sword, and he noticed that it was refined by the sect's Treasure Yang courtyard, and it wasn't made by the Shao clan. With a thought, he put it away in his sleeve, and he intended to bestow it to his disciples in the future. In this level, besides the 12 jade boxes, there were some other magical treasures. If they were placed in the outside world, they would be objects that would cause others to feel envious. However, they truly couldn't enter Zhang Yan's eyes, and he didn't even look at them carefully before tossing them to the side. In the third layer, there were 3 cultivation technique books. After flipping through them, Zhang Yan shook his head. Although the cultivation technique wasn't bad, there were many of them in the Jin Luo courtyard. It was useless to him. Instead, he found a few letters between Shao Mu and Nanhua sect, Taihao school, and a few other Yuanying spiritual masters. He took them out and opened them. He found that they were nothing more than old stories and greetings. Most of them were about how he fought with Tao Jinren. After looking at them, he didn't find anything special, so he put them to the side. In the next layer, there were all kinds of rare treasures, such as jade rabbits, jade horses, corals, agate, and emerald pearls. These things were used by Shao Mu as a gift to the younger generation in the clan. They were useless to Zhang Yan. Just as he was about to go over, he suddenly saw a jade tablet. He flipped his wrist and took it over. There was a vivid picture of a red-crowned crane on it that seemed like it was about to leap out. He thought about it and thought, if I'm not wrong, this beast prohibition talisman should be a gift from Nanhua sect's Yuanying spiritual master to Shao Mu. After thinking about it, this talisman would have some use in the future, so he put it away. At this moment, Zhang Yan didn't find anything good in the sleeve bag. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He didn't have any hope and looked at the last 5th layer. He only saw a lone silver-white wine pot with the 2 words, Mu Shi on it. Holding it in his hand, he found that it was at best a spiritual weapon. However, no matter how he poured it, he didn't see anything coming out of it. However, Zhang Yan didn't look down on this item. To be able to make Shao Mu place it alone, it definitely wasn't that simple. He stretched out his hand and wanted to pull open the cover of the jug. However, with his current strength, he couldn't open it. He was startled. His eyes flashed and he was instantly interested. He flipped the wine jug in his hand and immediately found something at the bottom of the bottle. There was a simple talisman hidden there. He used his Dan Sha and wiped it away. At this moment, there was no resistance when he lifted the cover of the jug. He easily opened it. He stretched out his palm and poured the contents out of the jug. Immediately, a handful of dark red beads rolled out. Each bead was the size of a fish's eye and was boiling hot. He didn't know what it was before, but after thinking about it, he couldn't help but be moved. He exclaimed, "Could this be Scarlet Thunderbead?" Chapter 370. Zhang Yan didn't expect Shao Mu to leave behind a pot of scarlet thunder beads. Just this item alone was enough to make up for all the previous ones. He was excited. He didn't expect to have such a harvest. It was not in vain that he kept this in his sleeve until now. This scarlet thunderbead was extremely powerful. It was created by the Yuanying cultivator's own Yuangang mixed with the scarlet thunderbead. After 49 days and nights of non-stop breathing out yang qi, it was finally formed. Once it was used, it would explode like the sky was falling, rocks would crack, everything within 100 feet would be turned into powder. Zhang Yan carefully stretched out his hand and grabbed a handful of them. If he were to throw a handful of them at an enemy, even a nascent soul cultivator would have to retreat and avoid them for the time being. He poured out all the scarlet thunder beads and counted them carefully. In the end, he found that there were as many as 378 beads. He was overjoyed and thought, there's actually so many of them, it seems that Xiaomu used them to deal with Tao Jinren. He thought again, if Xiaomu was killed by him, he would have used this on him. Even if he didn't die from the explosion, he could only watch helplessly as he ran away. In reality, he was thinking too much. At that critical moment, if Xiaomu had the Scarlet Thunder Bead in his hands, why wouldn't he use it to save his life? This Scarlet Thunder Bead was not created by Xiaomu alone, it was created by a few Yuanying Jinren and him. Just now he had obtained this much. Originally, he was going to use it to deal with Tao Jinren. But because the last step of the Scarlet Thunder Bead was to be nurtured in this mother tin pot, for half a year before it could be formed, even if Xiaomu wanted to use it, he wouldn't be able to. But if Zhang Yan and him were to fight a few days later, then it would be very hard to say. Zhang Yan carefully poured the red thunder gravel back into the pot and stuck a talisman on it. Then he put it in his sleeve pocket and carefully kept it. With the help of this item, he had some confidence in completing the task assigned by the sect leader. He pondered for a while and made sure that he had not missed anything. He thought to himself, once I'm done with the matters of the lower house, I'll be able to rush to Mount Qing Tong. He stood up, wrapped in a wisp of smoke, and flew around. In the blink of an eye, he exited the Zhaoyu cave abode through the formation door and flew towards the Azure Parasol Mountain. Arriving at the cloud-swaying peak of the lower courtyard, he stood on a large rock at the peak and sent a command talisman down. A moment later, the three deacons from the lower house hurried over. Zhang Yan asked in a slow voice, "There are still a few more days before the gathering day. How many people have come today?" Ever since Zhang Yan came to the lower house, the disciples from the aristocratic families had lost their arrogance and became cautious every day. They were afraid that if they were not careful, the three deacons would find out where it hurt, and Zhang Yan would use it as an excuse to expel them from the lower house. Because of this, the three deacons felt that their prestige was increasing day by day. They also knew where their confidence came from, and they engraved Zhang Yan's instructions in their hearts even more, not daring to forget them. At this moment, when Zhang Yan asked the question, Ma Shouxiang took the initiative to stand out and held up the register. Without even flipping through it, he immediately replied, reporting to deacons, the original date was 3 months. But 2 months ago, all the disciples had gathered, and there were no exceptions. The reason why the 4 disciples were arranged to enter the lower house was to obtain the position of a true disciple. Of course, they would not fall behind others. They had opened their meridians early and returned to their temples to wait. On the other hand, the disciples from the aristocratic families had been taught a lesson by Zhang Yan to the point that they were afraid. It was fine if they could not become a true disciple, but if they missed the deadline and were beheaded, they would have no one to reason with. Therefore, after Zhang Yan passed down the decree, they hurriedly went to open their meridians. Not daring to tarry for even a moment, they all returned to the mountain to wait patiently. Zhang Yan received the register and opened it. The words that entered his eyes were strong and powerful. On it were the disciples' names, ages, origins, years of cultivation, and the grade of each pulse. It was all clear at a glance, and he unconsciously nodded his head. His gaze swept over them, and he had already chosen a few people. Ma Shouxiang was already prepared and offered a brush and ink. Zhang Yan nodded to him, and with a tick of the brush, he selected the true disciples today. Among them, there were 4 people from the teacher and disciple faction, 4 from the aristocratic families, and 3 disciples who did not come from the large families. Finally, including the 2 Wang sisters, a total of 13 people were chosen, which was exactly half of the lower house disciples. After putting down the brush, he took out a jade seal and stamped it on the register. He then passed it to Ma Shouxiang, saying, "Because I have something important to do, I need to leave the mountain for a while. Right now, I have no time to care about what kind of spiritual houses these disciples will use. You don't have to rush to send them to the upper house. You can order them to return to their sects, and I will make arrangements when I return." Ma Shouxiang nodded in agreement, and the other two attendants behind him also agreed in unison. Zhang Yan gazed at the vast mountains, and with a shout, he turned into smoke and disappeared into the clouds in front of the three attendants' eyes. Soon after, they saw a sword rainbow tear through the atmosphere, speeding towards the northwest. After a flash of light, it completely disappeared, and only the sound of the sword whistling could be heard for a long time. 1,000 miles away from Mtiqing Tong, on top of a mound, there was a 10 feet long jade couch. An old man sat arrogantly on it. His eyes were sunken, his hair was long, and he wore a red robe that was like a blood cloud. With a single glance, it was obvious that he was a devil Dao cultivator. That was not all, but there was a woman in front of his couch. One of her clothes had been torn off, and she was dripping with blood. It was a tragic sight, but her expression was blurry, and her face was full of confusion. It was obvious that she did not feel any pain. Because the news of an immortal's house appearing on Mount Qing Tong had spread far and wide, everyone in the East Flower sect knew about it. Every day, there would be cultivators passing by, and when they saw this scene, they would all be surprised. However, because this was too strange, although many people hesitated and wanted to come down to investigate, they were afraid of this old man's cultivation, and no one dared to come over for a few days. After 3 days, 2 disciples of the Southern Flower sect passed by this place and stopped. They were a man and a woman, and they were a pair of brother and sister. Both of them were in the core formation realm. When they saw the arrogant and evil appearance in front of them, they felt indignant and could not hold back, but they were also afraid that the other party was up to something. After discussing with each other for a while, they each went in a different direction and wandered within a few hundred miles. Just now, when they met again, they saw that there was no help by their side, so they released the immortal birds they rode. They were 2 divine cranes with white feathers and red crowns. As soon as they were released, they spread their wings and let out a long and clear cry that stopped the clouds. At this time, they no longer hesitated. With a shout, they split into 2 sides, one from the left and the other from the right, and swooped down. The old man's expression was slightly solemn. He clenched his fist and shook his body. A yellow smoke flew out from the top of his head, and there seemed to be a malicious spirit in it. Miserable winds howled, and Yin Qi swirled violently as it rushed up. However, he was only in the core formation realm, so it was a bit difficult for him to fight 1 against 2. The 2 disciples each took out their magic swords and swung them down. A clear light flashed, and a crack was instantly cut open in the yellow smoke. At this moment, the old man heard the cry of a crane. Just as he was about to dodge, he felt pain in his shoulder. He could not help but grunt and immediately fell on the bed. The male disciple looked rather heroic. He stood in the clouds with his sword and sneered. "So it's a cultivator from the 9-piece cult. You're unlucky to run into us brother and sister today." Just now, they were still cautious. One of them held the line while the other attacked. They did not dare to attack recklessly. Now that they saw that the old man was injured, they could not help but relax a little. However, at this moment, a faint smoke that was hard to see with the naked eye floated over from behind. Then, it swayed gently, and a Taoist appeared behind the male disciple. This person was thin and ugly. His cheeks were sunken in, and although the bridge of his nose was straight, his nostrils were very big. A large part of his forehead was bald, and his sparse white hair fell on his shoulders. His eyes flashed with a faint green light, and his Taoist robe fluttered in the wind. He looked like a skeleton. The woman could see it clearly from afar and could not help but exclaim. The Taoist grinned and gave a strange smile. With a light blow, a wisp of black smoke flew out. This male disciple had quite a high status in the Southern Flower sect and was usually very quick-witted. When he heard that cry of surprise, he knew that something was wrong. He did not turn around to look and instead rushed forward. However, before he could take 2 steps, he felt a wave of dizziness. His limbs became weak, and he instantly fell from the sky. The Taoist flicked his finger, and a wisp of green fire flew out. With a sizzling sound, it touched the disciple's body. This person did not make a sound, and under the shocked gaze of the female disciple, he was burned into a pile of ashes. Even his origin spirit was extinguished. The woman wanted to escape, but she felt her body go limp. Then she felt a pain on her neck, and she discovered that it was pinched by a withered hand. The red-crowned crane that the female disciple brought with her circled around for a while before fiercely pecking at the Taoist's back. However, before it could get close, it seemed to have touched a layer of faint smoke, and for no reason, it turned into a pool of thick blood and disappeared. The red-crowned crane that the other male disciple left behind wailed, and then flew away without a trace. The strange Taoist shook his head and did not give chase. He muttered, "Are all the disciples of the South Flower sect so useless now?" Back then, Taoist Feiju dared to challenge Shaoqing's sect with his sword. Even though his appearance was ugly, his voice was deep and pleasing to the ear, and it made people want to listen to his words. He stared at the woman for a long time, and the eerie green fire in his eyes flickered. The female disciple was terrified, and her whole body trembled. However, with her neck pinched and her body powerless, she could not make a sound at all. After a while, the Taoist smacked his lips and let out a long sigh. He said, "Soft skin and tender flesh, it looks like it tastes good. Unfortunately, I have not eaten humans since I formed my nascent soul." He casually threw the woman in front of the old man's bed and said, "Su Gongyuan, I'll leave her for you." Su Gongyuan did not look at the woman, and his face was gloomy. He said, "Jinren, it has been 3 days, and you still haven't found a suitable physical body to attach your soul to?" The Taoist laughed. "Su Gongyuan, don't be impatient. Since I have promised to avenge your son, I will not go back on my words. If that Zhang Yan comes here, I will get rid of him for you. However, if you want me to kill my way to Qinsong School, I will not be able to do so unless I am tired of living." Su Gongyuan snorted. He understood that the object hidden under Mount Qingtong was the reason why the Taoist came here. If he was not proficient in formations and prohibition, he would not have been brought along by this person. Now that the disciples of Xian Gate were coming to Mount Qingtong, and there were many with high cultivation base among them, he could not move an inch without this person and could only listen to him. At this moment, the Taoist's expression changed. He licked his lips and said, "A few more people are coming, I hope my luck is better this time." Chapter 371. Mount Qingtong was located in the northwestern region of the East Flower continent. It was a vast plain, and the mountain peak rose from the ground. It was tall and lofty, like a sharp blade. Its color was lush, and its appearance was very strange. It looked like a pillar that had lost half of its length. When Zhang Yan arrived at this place, it was already nighttime. He looked over from 100 miles away, and sure enough, he saw the light of treasures soaring into the sky. It was as if the clouds had dyed the sky red, and it illuminated the entire sky. It was even more magnificent than the stars in the sky. He raised his head and looked over. From time to time, there would be a few streaks of light flashing across the sky like shooting stars. They were cultivators who also wanted to go to Mount Qingtong. The commotion in Mount Qingtong was really too big. In the eyes of many cultivators, if it wasn't the appearance of the celestial abode, then it was the appearance of the Devil Palace. Thus, those who received the news all rushed over, afraid that if they were a step too late, the benefits would be taken away by others. When Zhang Yan came over just now, he saw many disciples of the Celestial Gate. However, his sword escape was very fast, and he flashed by so no one could tell who he was. He thought to himself that with his current identity, if he directly rushed over, he would definitely attract the attention of others, and they might even be on guard and be afraid of him. This time, he came under the secret order of the sect master, so he couldn't be too ostentatious. His mind changed, and he thought to himself, "Looks like I have to conceal myself again." He reached into his sleeve and took out the Thousand Phantoms jade mirror. He flipped through the pages, and after a dozen or so pages, his eyes fell on the portrait of a young cultivator. This person's appearance was ordinary, and there was nothing special about him. He could use it. He smiled slightly, and his eyes looked at the portrait of this person, and he shook the mirror. That person walked down and merged with Chu Li's body. A stream of clear air passed by, and Chu Li's appearance changed. Zhang Yan opened his sleeve and looked at it. The treasured clothes he was wearing were also very eye-catching, so he took out a crane cloak and put it on to cover his body. After a careful look, he saw that there were no more flaws, and he nodded in satisfaction. With a leap, he flew into the air. However, he had only flown a few dozen miles when he saw a mound in the wilderness. There was a jade couch on top of the mound, and an old man wearing a red robe was standing there. He seemed to be sizing up the cultivators passing by, and when he saw Zhang Yan flying over, then he cast a cold gaze over. Isn't that Su Gongyuan? When Zhang Yan saw this, his eyebrows unconsciously rose as he recognized the other party's origins. However, he had already changed his appearance, so he didn't want to cause trouble for this person. With a burst of his escaping smoke, he quickly flew away. Just now, as the two of them looked at each other, Su Gongyuan inexplicably felt that this person seemed somewhat familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere before. However, when he took a closer look, he couldn't find any trace of familiarity. For someone like him, as long as he had seen someone before, he would remember it in his heart. He couldn't help but frown. After Zhang Yan left, a wisp of faintly discernible, slightly muddy yellow smoke floated over. A wisp of faintly discernible and slightly muddy smoke floated over. The old Taoist's voice rang in his ears. But, do you know this person? If he is your enemy, just say the word and I will go and capture him. Su Gongyuan hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. He said in a low voice, "Forget it, perhaps this junior recognized the wrong person." Although he was suspicious of Zhang Yan's identity, if he really called this old demon to capture someone, the next time he met the person, this old demon might not be willing to do anything. However, when he said this, he definitely didn't think that the enemy he had been searching for had already brushed past him. At this moment, in front of Qingtong Mountain, from time to time, a formation that looked like a decorated archway would appear and disappear. There were hundreds of cultivators flying around it like stars, but most of them weren't paying attention to whether or not they should enter. Just now, some people dared to enter the formation, but in the blink of an eye, they found themselves at the back of the mountain. This could be considered lucky, as up until now, only to see people enter and not leave the formation. As a result, although there were many cultivators here, there weren't many who were proficient in formations, so they couldn't help but be cautious and hesitant, not daring to recklessly enter. In a remote corner on the west side, 5 or 6 cultivators were gathered together. They were all disciples of the 5 Smoke Mountains Path Source Immortal Mansion. One of them looked at the formation and shook his head. "I wonder what formation this is, the number of cycles doesn't make sense at all." A middle-aged cultivator who seemed to be the leader turned around and looked behind him. There was a white-bearded old man sitting there with a focused expression, holding a pile of bamboo chips and repeatedly calculating. The middle-aged cultivator said, "There's no rush, let's wait for Elder Hu to calculate it." However, every time the old man calculated, he would shake his head and frown would deepen. After an hour, he finally threw away the bamboo chips and said apologetically, "Everyone, I'm quite accomplished in the path of formations, but if I want to understand this formation clearly, it's definitely not something that can be done in a mere few days." The middle-aged Taoist also knew that this formation wasn't easy to break, so he asked patiently, "May I ask Hu Lai, how long will it take?" The old man stretched out 2 fingers and said, 20 years. 20 years? The surrounding disciples exclaimed in surprise, and one of them said with slight mockery, "If it takes 20 years, why would we come looking for you?" The old man couldn't sit still when he was mocked in front of his face. However, besides being proficient in formations, he had nothing else in his life, and his cultivation couldn't compare to these people. He wanted to argue, but when the words reached his mouth, they turned into a grunt in the end. He simply cupped his hands and left in a huff. The middle-aged Taoist saw that he was useless, so he didn't try to persuade him to stay at all and let him go. As a result, the old man felt even more annoyed. He walked quickly and left the group of people, muttering a few words. When he was far away, he was about to take out a magic tool and fly away, but he heard someone shout behind him, "Fellow Taoist, please wait." He stopped and turned around. He saw an average-looking young cultivator of average stature, so he asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist, what's the matter?" This person was Zhang Yan. He walked up and bowed, saying, "Fellow Taoist, just now, I saw you deducing the formation from the side. I believe you must have some understanding of it. I have a few questions in my mind, so I wanted to ask for your advice." The old man saw that his attitude was kind, and though he couldn't see through his cultivation level, he felt that his cultivation level was quite high. He didn't dare to be arrogant, so he quickly bowed back and said, "I don't dare to be arrogant. What questions do you have? Please ask. If I know anything, I will definitely tell you." Zhang Yan pointed behind him and said, "Fellow Taoist, if I want to enter this formation, are there any taboos?" The old man chuckled and said, "Since fellow Taoist is sincerely asking, then I will be frank." Then let this old man be frank. Although this formation can mess up one's position and reverse the 5 elements, it is actually just a bewildering formation. It is not a killing formation. No matter who passes through it, they will not suffer any damage. However, if one's luck is too bad, they will die. However, if one's luck is too bad, if one is trapped here for dozens of years and still can't get out, I'm afraid they'll be trapped here until they die. Zhang Yan asked again, "Then if we invite many powerful cultivators here, can they break through this formation?" The old man shook his head and said, "Fellow Taoist must be joking. This formation is connected to the earth veins and corresponds to the heavens. If I'm not wrong, this should be a protective formation. Unless you can destroy the entire Qingtong mountain along with the earth veins within 1,000 miles, you won't be able to break through the formation with brute force. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking." When Zhang Yan heard this, he already knew what was going on. Now that he knew what was going on, he cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your guidance, fellow Taoist." After saying goodbye to the old man, he pondered for a while and rode his smoke to the sky. He looked down. After a while, he saw a decorated archway appear. His eyes flashed and he formed a hand sign. After a long smoke flew over, he entered the formation. At the same time, 2 cultivators from the Ina temple stepped into the formation from Qingtong Mountain. They gazed over. They couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. This place was vast and boundless. In the distance, there was a tall mountain. On the mountain ridge, there were continuous palaces and pavilions. There was a long river that was like a jade belt, winding from the north and surrounding the mountain. If they didn't know that they had stepped into Qingtong Mountain, they would think that they had returned to the outside world. One of the cultivators with a fat body and a thin mustache couldn't help but exclaim, "Senior Marshal Brother, this is clearly a small world created by a powerful cultivator." Standing beside him was a Taoist wearing a lotus crown and a yellow robe. His body was strong and his eyes were spirited. When he heard this, he nodded. His gaze swept over and suddenly saw a decorated archway at the foot of the mountain. He pointed with his horsetail whisk and said, "Let's go there and take a look." The 2 of them flew up and landed below the decorated archway. The Taoist walked up and raised his head to take a look. He saw that on the jade plaque there were some words. However, it seemed to be very old and was a bit unclear. After looking at it carefully a few times, just now he was able to recognize the 2 words, Yaoyin, and unconsciously read it out. The thin mustache cultivator frowned and thought hard, as if he was thinking about its origin. In the end, he said with uncertainty, "Senior Marshal Brother, this Yaoyin. Could it be the Yaoyin clan?" Then, his body trembled and he said in shock, "Could this place be the place where old ancestor Tai Heng ascended?" The Taoist in the lead had a solemn expression and said in a deep voice, "Junior Marshal Brother, it's not impossible. 1,000 years ago, when I was still a Taoist child under my master, I heard of the Yaoyin clan's reputation. Rumor has it that it's a sect established by old ancestor Tai Heng's eldest disciple, Ijuyang. This old ancestor Taiheng was once a great figure in the demonic path, and his cultivation was exceedingly high. However, for some reason, all the techniques he passed down were profound Taoist techniques. It's truly puzzling. Later on, he ascended and no one heard of anyone obtaining his demonic sect's teachings. Some people suspected that it was hidden in this Yaoyin clan. However, I heard that this sect's whereabouts were mysterious and no one knew where it was. I never expected it to be here. The two of them looked at each other, and their eyes were filled with shock and worry. If the old ancestor Taiheng's teachings were really hidden here, then it wouldn't be as simple as one or two Taoist books, but all the inheritances of the entire sect. The Yaoyin clan's inheritance was one thing, but if the demonic sect's secret techniques were here, if the demonic sect's disciple obtained it, it would undoubtedly greatly strengthen the demonic sect. The thin-bearded cultivator couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat when he thought of this and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, we can't let that demonic sect disciple obtain this place. We need to quickly return and report to the sect master." The Taoist shook his head and said, "This place is easy to enter but hard to leave. Even if you go back, you won't be able to find the way." The thin-bearded cultivator couldn't help but become anxious and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, then what should we do?" The Taoist stroked his beard and said, "Don't panic. Since we're here, let's explore it first and find the mechanism." He raised his horsetail whisk and pointed to the mountain path in front of him, saying, "Let's go there first." Not long after they left, a decorated archway appeared out of thin air. With a flash of light, Zhang Yan walked out from it. Chapter 372. As soon as Zhang Yan entered the formation, he saw that it was a vast place with blue sky and clear water. In the distance, the mountain range stretched on like a crouching beast lying on the ground, its back undulating. The highest peak was covered by the clouds, misty and indistinguishable. On the verdant mountain ridge, one could see tall pavilions and temples covered in golden glazed tiles. The exquisite pavilions followed the mountain and went straight up to the peak. He counted carefully and found that there were a total of 18 mountain ridges, and each of them converged on the highest peak. Because the sect leader mentioned a few things in the letter, he knew a little about the origin of this place. He knew that this should be a small world, a place left behind by the big sect Yaoyin mountain sect tens of thousands of years ago. He thought to himself, seeing that the restrictive spells here are intact, there must be a place where the evil earth is planted. If I can bring a few back and fill up my abode, I won't need to ask for it from that sect and won't be controlled by others. The evil earth was not like the elixir. If the elixir had been around for a long time, no matter how well it was preserved, it would still lose its medicinal properties. But the evil earth was different. As long as it was carefully cultivated, it could evolve on its own. As long as the spiritual energy in the veins did not decline, it would never dry up. The trees here were lush and flourishing. Especially the restrictive spells did not decline. If the evil earth was preserved, it would not easily disperse. Looking at the palaces in front of him, Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. Even the Qinsong school did not have many evil earth that had been around for tens of thousands of years. Although he had obtained a continent of the Su clan and there were a few evil earth spiritual veins on it, the best ones in the Su clan had already been taken by the sect. These few were not as good as the ones given by Jinren Peng, so he did not care about them. He wanted to find a few more, but now that he saw this place, he could not help but think about it. He looked back and forth and roughly glanced at the temples. There were at least 100 of them, but he did not know where the evil earth was hiding. He changed his mind and thought that he could only go up the mountain first. He would have to take one step at a time. At this time, many disciples came out of the formation door and appeared at the foot of the mountain. Among them, there were a few people who were surrounded by people, and they were in high spirits. Looking at their attire and dressing, and looking at the immortal beasts they were riding, it was obvious that they were the disciples of the Southern Flower sect. Zhang Yan intentionally avoided this group of people and turned into a wisp of smoke. He walked towards a secluded place. When he arrived at the entrance of a mountain path, He raised his eyes to look and saw a lone figure flying along the ridge of the mountain. After pondering for a moment, he knew that there ought to be a restriction that enveloped the entire mountain, and no one could leap to the peak of the mountain. That was why there were such rules and regulations. After a few glances, he flicked his sleeves and flew up. He flew along the mountain path at a moderate speed. After a short while, he saw a winding path ahead of him. There was an additional rugged stone staircase, and on top of it was an imposing temple. The few figures in front of him had already disappeared. After pondering for a while, he also landed on the cloud and stepped into the main hall. This monastery was filled with large pillars made of gold and bronze. There were strange beasts carved with profound patterns, and the jade bricks beneath their feet were untainted by even a speck of dust. It was obvious that the restrictive formation still existed. In the middle of the main hall, there was a stone tablet that was 30 feet tall, and there were a dozen cultivators in different attire pointing at it. Someone said loudly, "Everyone, the restrictive formation in this hall is complicated, and if we can't break it, we won't be able to force our way in." Just now, there were a few Taoists who rashly went in, and they were injured by the formation and had to retreat. However, there was also a Taoist who was unlucky and got trapped inside. Immediately, someone said, "Just now on another mountain path, I saw a Taoist from the Shaoqing sect, and he just raised his sword to cut open a path. However, when others tried again, they couldn't do it anymore." Zhang Yan thought to himself, "I never thought that there would be a few people from the Shaoqing sect here. However, with the personalities of the Shaoqing sect's disciples, other than swords, there's nothing else. I think they're not here for some ancestor's treasure. They're probably here to find opponents to sharpen their swords." The person who spoke first smiled bitterly and said, "Shaoqing sect is the #1 sect in Xianmen, and their disciples carry good treasures with them. Small sects like us can't compare to them. Moreover, when that senior brother tried to force his way in with his sword, the formation only paused for a moment before it spun again. Only one person went through, so didn't the others still fail? In my opinion, why don't I wait here for a while and wait for a few Taoists to come and see if we can work together to break the restriction?" Everyone had tried to work together earlier, but they were still a little lacking. Right now, they didn't have any other good ideas, and no one objected to this suggestion. Thus, they retreated to the sides and sat on one side. Some people walked around, knocking and knocking to see if they could find any treasures. This restriction was originally used by the disciples of this sect to go up and down in the past. They only needed to cast a spell, and they would be able to enter the higher halls, so there was no need to go up step by step. However, everyone didn't know the profoundness of it, so it became a tiger blocking their way. Someone sighed and said, "To be able to create this boundary, it must be a big sect from thousands of years ago. Looking at the restriction formation, it's not damaged, so there might be many good things left behind. What do you think, Taoists?" Someone continued and said loudly, "This Taoist is right. Since we're different from those big sect's disciples, there's no need to be too anxious." Everyone nodded, and all of them deeply agreed. If this place was really left behind by a big sect in the past, it was unknown how many good things were left behind. Disciples of small sects like them all placed their sights on cultivation techniques, magic treasures, and spirit pills, whereas those immortal palaces and earth terminus spirit veins were what those big sects' disciples needed. If it wasn't so, they wouldn't have the confidence to fight for it. At this time, Zhang Yan walked to the stone tablet alone, and his eyes stared at the restriction on it as if he was lost in thought. Someone kindly reminded him, "Fellow Taoist, there's no need to be anxious. Wait for another half a day, and I'm sure many fellow Taoists will come. At that time, we'll work together to break it." Zhang Yan didn't pay attention to him, and he stood silently before the stone tablet for a moment. He found that it wasn't difficult to break through this restriction, so he took a step forward and relied on his body that was as hard as metal to charge forward. With a bang, the hall trembled, and his figure disappeared. The disciples present were all stunned, and a slightly quick-witted person slapped his forehead and jumped up as he said with wild joy, "So that's how it is." He impatiently walked forward and stood there for a moment like Zhang Yan, and then he used all the strength in his body to collide with the stone tablet. Bang! he staggered back and fell backwards, and he lay on the ground with his head broken and bleeding. Everyone in the surroundings glanced at each other and were astounded. Zhang Yan came out from the restriction formation, and he noticed that he was standing on a small square that was around an acre in size. On his left was a 30 kilometers deep ravine, and on his right was a cliff. When he raised his head to look, he saw a pergola at the top, and it was built by relying on the mountain to merge with the cliff. It was extremely precipitous, and a waterfall flowed down and emitted rumbling sounds. Not far in front of him, there was a golden gourd floating in the air, and it spewed out thick clouds of smoke. A Taoist sat on it, and he held a deer antler-shaped magic tool in his hand. His eyes were closed, and there were bloodstains on his chest, as if he was injured. A person who looked like a disciple was standing guard at the side, and when he saw Zhang Yan, he coldly said, "Just now, there are traces of a demon pretending to be a cultivator of my profound sect. Which disciple are you? Hurry up and report your name, and don't make a mistake." Zhang Yan swept his gaze around, and he cupped his hands. "I'm Xian Yuanzi, an independent cultivator of the Eastern Sea. How should I address you?" The young cultivator took a few careful glances at him as if he was trying to find some flaws. In the end, he snorted and put away his sword. He returned the greeting and said, "I am a disciple of Tai House Sect's Shichui Mountain. This is my martial uncle. Just now, there is a demon who knows where he came from wreaking havoc here, and he has been fighting with us for a long time. Later, he retreated with injuries, so be careful, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan smiled. "So it's a fellow Taoist from the Tai House School. 30 years ago, I was friends with your sect's spiritual master Han Guzi in the outer endless sea. I haven't seen you for many years. How are you?" The young cultivator was startled, and then he smiled. Good. Before I left the mountain, I even met this spiritual master once." Zhang Yan smiled and he squinted his eyes. "May I know which demon lord you are under?" The young Taoist's expression did not change, and he frowned. "What do you mean, fellow Taoist? Don't make such a joke." Zhang Yan shook his head and sighed. "Fellow Taoist, even if you pretend to be from the Tai House School, you should know that Han Guzi is from the condensed Jade Manor, and he has never left the sect for 100 years, so how can you say that you met me 30 years ago? Other than that, fellow Taoist has too many flaws, so you must have set it up in a hurry. It can deceive those ignorant people, but it can't deceive I." When the young Taoist heard that, he did not say anything at first, and then he laughed out loud. As his laughter drifted away, the image of the Taoist on the gourd also drifted away. It was actually an illusion. This Taoist's appearance was not fake. Just now, he used this method to take advantage of the respect that itinerant cultivators had for the disciples of the big sects, and he had already obtained many people's vitality essence as well as many magic treasures. With such a good deal, he was not tired of it. It was a pity that those people could pass through that restriction, and their abilities were not weak, but they died here mysteriously and lost their lives. The young Taoist tidied his clothes and bowed. "I am Jioming Sect's direct disciple, Kai Shin. May I know your real name, fellow Taoist?" Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back and smiled faintly. Zhang Yan. At that moment, 50 kilometers away from Mount Qintong, the bald Taoist was meditating with his eyes closed. Su Gongyuan was guarding beside him, and his expression was rather vigilant. After a while, the bald Taoist slowly opened his eyes, and Su Gongyuan hurriedly said, "Zhenren, how is it?" The bald Taoist chuckled. "I've already found out about the physical body I seized. This is indeed the location of the Yaoyin Mountain Gate in the past. My dead master uncle did not lie to me." Green light flickered in his eyes as he said, "Now that the world has changed and our spiritual gate is flourishing, this demon palace has appeared in response to fate. If I can obtain this inheritance, I can also establish a sect overseas and form a grotto heaven like Tao Zhenhong." Su Gongyuan took a breath and hesitated. "A few days ago, I accidentally saw 3 Yuanian cultivators from the big Xianmen sects entering Mount Qingtong." The bald Taoist was displeased. "With me here, what are you afraid of?" Su Gongyuan took a step back and said in a muffled voice, Then what are you going to do? The Taoist laughed out loud. He raised his hand and made a chopping motion. He scoffed. What else can I do? I'll just kill them all. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.